Hello and welcome and good morning. It's really early, but it's late in America. And the bottom line, the situation, early days yet, but it's not looking that good for Biden. Not as good as expected. He has not lost. Trump has not won, but there are one or two disappointing trends that Biden will be facing. And my colleague Vasu will be joining us from Patna to Pennsylvania. Where are you, Vasu? Patna or Pennsylvania? I can't quite remember. You're all over the place.
Patna to Pennsylvania was supposed to be my line, which you borrowed, so I'll have to come up with something else. From Begusarai to Baltimore.
Arey wah, not bad. Okay, just let's have a quick roundout about the current situation. What states are being projected for who, and were they expected to be, who was expected to be leading there. First of all, look at South Carolina. Projected to be a Trump victory. The 2020 polls suggested it would be a Democrat victory, and Democrats won last time. So this is really huge. Actually, this is a Republican gain. Here we are, Illinois. Projected to be a Democrat win easily, and they are holding it. The Democrats won here last time. That's okay for Biden. Oklahoma. 7, a small state. Democrats are projected to lose here. The Republicans won it last time, so it's just a hold, and it's expected. Let's move on. Indiana. Republicans won last time. They're holding it this time. Polls said Republicans would win it this time. Let's move on to the next. North Carolina, a pretty narrow state, swing state, a Democrat swing state. This will be a bit of a worry for Trump. Biden it's a gain for the Democrats. The Republicans held it last time. Tennessee, a huge, comfortable win normally for the Republicans, and Trump is holding that. That's as expected. West Virginia, again, a huge victory projected for, it's a safe seat for the Republicans, and Trump is holding on to that. Nothing unexpected there. Now we're moving on to New Jersey. This is a solid Democrat state. Look at that. It was projected to win by 20%, and the Democrats are holding on. Pennsylvania, this is a swing state. Now this would have been very important for Trump to get hold of. So the Democrats are gaining this because Trump won it last time, but the polls projected. And let's move on to Ohio. Republicans won it last time. Polls projecting Republicans to win it narrowly this time, and the Democrats are gaining this. That's a big. So things are changing as the day goes on. Here's a Republican gain. My gosh, this is Illinois. Illinois, it was projected to be won by the Democrats. They won it last time. At the moment, Trump is being projected to win. Things can change over time. So this is a switch from, this is a huge surprise. But we'll come back to that. Texas. This is a really important state. 38 electoral college votes. Huge. The Republicans won it last time. They were projected to win it narrowly this time, and it's currently being projected as a Democrat gain. That is the biggest news of the morning so far. Texas. 38 seats switching sides towards the Democrats. DC always totally Democrat, and it's happening again this time by as big a margin as last time, almost. So Democrats are holding on. It's only 3. It's not a state. It's the 50 states. Just let's go back to the first one we showed. Just see you've got an update on that. If we can get back to that. Here we are. Indiana. Republicans won it last time. Republicans are projected to win it this time, and they've held on to it. And all this will change as we go along. Okay, once more, Massachusetts. Democrats always have won this state. It's a solid, traditionally Democrat state, and they're holding it, projected to be holding it right now. So, a really important start. We need to look at Florida at some point, because there's a big change happening there. Yeah, we've seen So let me go to Dorab and Baj. But first, Vasu. Some surprise here. Wait, Florida. That's really, really important. Here, the Democrats, the polls say Democrats were going to win this by a narrow margin. And it's a big state, 29 electoral college votes. The Republicans won it narrowly last time, but now it looks as though the polls are wrong here, and that I think even Nate Silver has accepted that. It's looking wrong. I mean, there's still a few more votes to be counted, but this is a big one. Right, Dorab? This, what kind of overall picture are you getting right now, Dorab?
I'm sorry. Yes. I think it's almost as expected. The one thing I'd like to correct, you said South Carolina was a Democratic state. It wasn't. It was Republican. North Carolina was Republican.
Right.
South Carolina,
right. Yes,
Lindsey Graham is standing for the Senate. He'll also win probably.
Right.
I think Florida, we need to wait a little, because last time 3% of the votes went to other candidates, the Libertarian Party and the Greens. This time they're down to 1%.
You're talking about, were you talking about South Carolina?
Sorry?
Yeah.
Since 2016.
Carry on.
Since 2016, the number of non-college educated people in Florida has gone down by 500,000. The number of college educated people has gone up by more than 1 million. So, there is that slight move in the direction of Biden. We still have to wait, of course, but it's always close.
This is important. Just 1 second. North Carolina, polls projected a gain for the Democrats, and it looks like it is going to be a gain from last time. North Carolina.
Okay, there is a Senate seat there.
That's really important as well.
There is a Senate seat there, a very important Senate seat. That might also go.
Okay. But let's just stick at the presidential at the moment. Baj, what are you getting so far as the general picture?
Well, obviously, like you said, there's no landslide likely. And I tweeted 2 minutes ago, but the New York Times is calling Florida for the Republicans, and they're running an exit poll which shows that Cuban and Hispanic neighborhoods, there has been a 13 and 11% swing to the Republicans. And while Democrats have gained, and while Democrats have gained amongst older whites, that is not enough for them to win. So they're actually saying it's a 95% chance that Trump will win. They are also saying that
I think,
Georgia,
Baj, there's you were always pointing out to a particular county to look out for, Miami-Dade, which Hillary won by a huge margin, and this time Democrats have won, Biden has won, but by a much smaller margin, and that is meant to be a turning point, that Miami-Dade, and you did point out, keep focusing on that county. Big change. I think the Cubans have caused the swing.
Miami-Dade has, so far it looks like their majority has dropped by about 10% here. So that's huge. I think on Miami-Dade, we can say that journalists were better than pollsters, because everybody was writing about the fact that blacks weren't turning out, Hispanics were turning out for Republicans, and there was a huge Republican drive in the last year.
Vasu, Baj says journalists better than pollsters.
Always. Prannoy, where's this ever in doubt?
So who's...
Let's actually go across to Amitoj Singh. Amitoj Singh is with us from New York City, I believe. I mean, I don't know if we're getting anything from New York itself. I don't think there are any big surprises. But Amitoj, what are you hearing and seeing so far?
Well, you guys are on top.
And also, where is Trump and where is Biden? Do we know?
That is surprising, to say the least, if I can say that. But let me just break it down. Here's what I think Baj needs to stress a little bit more on. When you talked about Miami-Dade and Florida, Florida is representative of America. It's basically the microcosm of America. Florida is giving you a signal, and Georgia has given you a signal. Georgia had become a battleground state, which was anyway a surprise because it's a Republican state historically. But at this time, what you're seeing is that both are leaning towards the Republicans, and Donald Trump is doing better. And the big one, I want to stress on Miami-Dade, and I want to stress on Hillsborough County, which is another county. There are 67 counties that I've studied, all of them out there in Florida. I can tell you that these are the most populous counties. So they actually count for the most amount of votes. Now, in Miami-Dade, what happened last time in 2016 was that Hillary Clinton won the most number of votes that Democratic candidate has actually won, 63%, 1% more than even Barack Obama managed in Florida. And this time what's happening is that in the early votes, and this is a bad sign because the early votes are usually Democratic, they are not even at 55%. So what you're looking at is that Florida is in the game and is there for Trump. If that's the case, then it's definitely what Baj said, that it's not going to be a result tonight. We're going to have to wait. The good news for the Democratic Party is Pennsylvania, where you're looking at a percentage that one was not expecting. But again, the rider to that is that you're looking at early votes. There are people who voted early by that is in person or by mail. So I think, Vasu, we just have to wait. We have to be patient. This is a situation where there's going to be a lot of PTSD that is going to be coming back. That's okay. Live with it. Survive. We're going to get the result, but it's going to take a while. And I think it's still going to come down to Pennsylvania. Just one last thing I want to say. In 2000 and after that, they've always said one thing. They've said the way to win the American election is Florida, Florida, Florida. This time, Karl Rove, who everyone knows is the best Republican strategist there is, he has said that the way to win the American election is Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania. And Pennsylvania will not give us a decisive result, probably, one that someone called Donald Trump will actually accept all the way till Friday.
Right.
Okay.
Let's just do one thing, Vasu. Let's just go through it all again, because every minute...
Yes.
Every minute that we're on air, the more votes are being counted and the leads are changing. So let's just go through what the latest situation is in each state, because that gives us a picture. First of all, let's look at Ohio. Ohio projected by the polls to be Republican narrowly, but it is more or less in the Democrat, because it was very, very narrow, and the Democrats have gained that since last time, and that's 18 electoral college votes. That's pretty big. That's a big swing. 18 less for the Republicans since last time and 18 more for the Democrats. That's a 36 electoral college vote swing. Let's move on to another one. Pennsylvania, Amitoj was just talking about that. The Republicans won it last time. The polls projected that Democrats would win it this time, and the Democrats are leading there. It's a gain for the Democrats, 20 electoral college votes. So that's another 40 seats swing. 20 less for Republicans, 20 more for Democrats. Oklahoma, it's a foregone conclusion. We can move on. It's always won by huge margins, and it's holding on to that, Republicans. North Carolina, this was, again, it's a fairly big state, 15 electoral college votes, held and won by the Republicans in 2016. Polls, though, suggested this was going to flip, and it has flipped. It was suggested just flip very narrowly, so we don't know how many votes have been counted and how many more to come. But at the moment, that's another 15 electoral college votes flipping
I would just
from
want
one
to point
side
out
to
that
another.
North Carolina has had 95% of its votes that have been counted so far are actually early votes. That means mail-in votes and people who voted early by walking in a few days early. 95% of the votes that have been counted. So North Carolina,
that's
we should
an
wait
important
on.
point. Yeah. But whenever we have a tick and project it, that's what at least two American major sources are projecting. They're projecting a victory there based on all these factors. But you're right. The early votes will tend to be more Democrat, and today's voting in person will be more Republican. That's what people say. Ohio, we've done. This is a huge gain because the Republicans won it by 8% last time and were projected by the polls to win. Now, this is the biggest gain from the polls for the Democrats and for the Republicans, and Trump will be really pleased with this. The Republicans held on to this by 1%. Hillary Clinton was most disappointed with what happened in Florida. The polls said they was going to switch this time to Democrat, but it didn't switch. The polls were wrong here. Let's move on to next. Arkansas. Absolutely traditional Republican. No need to even bother about that. It's as per projection and as per expectation. Oklahoma, again similar, traditionally Republican, and Republican are holding on to that. But that's very easy. Huge margins of victory. Now New Jersey, again exactly the opposite, totally expected. Democrats were projected to win this by 20%. They won it by 14% last time, and they're holding on to it. So it's a safe Democrat seat, and they are holding it. Again, DC, it's 91%. That's just like, you could predict that with your eyes shut. Texas. Now let's hold on here for a second. Texas is a hugely important state. 52 to 43% to the Republican, a 9% margin of victory last time. Polls had suggested the Republicans would still hold on, but by narrowly, so it was projected to be a swing state, and the Democrats have gained that. Now that is huge in terms of a switch. 38. Baj, this is and Dorab, this is huge, right? 38 seats switching, that's a 76% 76 electoral college vote swing.
It's the second largest state after California, and currently they are leading by, the Democrats are leading by 3% in Texas. I mean, it's not gone Republican since Democrats since 1980. 40 years it's been a Republican state. So if it goes, I mean, you then don't need Florida. It's much bigger than California. It's after California, the second largest state. They've registered 1.9 million voters between 2016 and 2020, more than any other state.
Right.
New voters. And the majority of them are young. And also there's migration into
Texas,
let's go across like California.
Yeah. Right. Very, very important. Let's go across to Cindy Sain. She's the Voice of America reporter talking to us. Cindy Sain, Florida will be a huge disappointment for the Democrats and a huge encouragement for the Republicans. But what about Texas? What's your take of the current trends? I know things are going to change, but currently, what is the situation according to you?
Right. Well, I've been following along, and you're right on your trends so far. And I would say right now it's still early, but there are a couple of warning signs for President Trump, which, as you have pointed out, currently, as I speak to you at this moment, it looks like former Vice President Biden is at least very competitive in Ohio and in North Carolina, which is my home state.
Yes.
And these are states that Republicans were expected to win, that President Trump was expected to win. So that looks very good if you're Joe Biden. Not so, a little nerve-wracking for President Trump. But as you say, Florida, and particularly the Miami-Dade County area, is a disappointment for Joe Biden because apparently Latino voters or the turnout there was not as good. VOA is not calling Florida yet by any means, but so far it's looking President Trump is leading there.
Terrific. Right. So just your view on Texas. How kind of certain are we that which way is that going to go? Is there could that still change? Because
yes,
it's so significant.
It definitely could. And as you pointed out, it is a huge prize, 38 electoral votes, but I would say it's so far it's too early to know. With all as you well know, we've got the complications with the early vote, and there was tremendous turnout in Harris County, and there were even legal battles over curbside voting, whether that could be counted or not, and that prevailed that could be counted, which is what Democrats wanted. So I think we may have to be a little bit how Texas turns out.
Right. Vasu,
on Texas,
you've got a question.
Yeah, Cindy, I just wanted to ask you, whether you had any idea where the two main presidential candidates are going to be tonight. Because in 2016, both of them were holding these victory rallies in New York, Trump and Hillary. I guess with the pandemic, that's out of the question now.
Right. Yeah, it is a bit different this year. President Trump is at the White House, and I think there is some kind of gathering or event at the White House. Reports said that he originally was planning to have it at the Trump Hotel in Washington, but then changed plans 3 or 4 days ago. Vice President Biden is watching the returns at home in Delaware, and he said that if he had something to say, he would come out and say it, but if not, he would just wait patiently until all the votes are counted. So right now, everybody just watching, not seeing either of them yet, and still early in the evening here, so waiting to have some more of these states counted out.
Okay, Prannoy.
Bring up Illinois, Vasu. Just have a look at Illinois, if we can bring that. And we can bring in Sadanand Dhume. Thank you very much, Sadanand, for joining us. Before we get Illinois latest position up, Sadanand, your take on the current situation. Who would be more tense right now, Donald Trump or Biden?
Biden for sure. I think it's definitely still early days and with the usual caveats. But if you look at the 3 swing states that they're leaning towards Trump, if you look at Florida, North Carolina, and Georgia, it looks like all 3 are going for Trump. Even though at this point Biden is not trailing in all of the 3, but if you go by the forecast based on where they've already counted and where the counting still has to be done, so if Trump is 3 for 3. And the New York Times right now is reporting that there's a 66% chance that Trump is 3 for 3 in those states. Then it means that he is starting this evening with a very solid lead. And I cannot overemphasize the importance of Florida, because if Biden had managed to win Florida, it would have been very, very difficult for Trump. And then we would have seen perhaps the makings of a blue wave. But if Trump holds Florida, holds North Carolina, which people were also talking of as a swing state, then I think it becomes much more competitive. And one more very quick point, I don't think, I think it's way premature to be talking about Texas, simply because the votes that we're looking at are basically coming in right now, if I'm not mistaken, from the Houston area. So, and then there's also the question of early ballot counting. So basically, the last polls did show Trump ahead. I don't think we should read too much into early voting in Texas. Florida, it's not early voting. They've counted more than 90% of the vote. And so the places to look at more closely at this stage of the evening over here, morning over there for you, would perhaps be places like Florida and Ohio, where we actually have a good chunk of the vote in to look at.
Soni?
Vasu, you had a question. Oh, Vasu's. Dorab, you heard what Sadanand Dhume said. He said that at this moment Biden would be more tense. Do you agree with that?
I think so. I think, if the chances of Florida are slipping out of his hands, and that is,
yeah,
that is very concerning, because then he just stops Trump in his tracks there. When Florida goes, then he has to work that much harder to get there. And, he has to turn North Carolina. Frankly, Texas, I think now would solve most of his problem. But Ohio is leading. We lost last time. Biden is leading in Ohio, which also is a big state, not as big as Florida, but still a relatively large state. So I think, but he must be more tense, because nothing seems to be going particularly his way. It's as last time. He's got to change as last time. And the northern states, Pennsylvania has come, but the limited numbers have come in. So Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, those states, then he has to win if he has to stay in the race. But I think Texas, the state to watch, more than 60% has been counted. So we got to just wait and watch that. But the blue wall is what he's got to build again. If he builds that, he wins. Otherwise, he loses. He's got to build the. I think Florida is nearly gone.
Anything to add to that? Because things are changing as we speak, but certain underlying patterns are emerging.
Yeah, I think Texas, which we seem to be thinking is could be in play. Actually, the counties that are reporting are the ones that Democrats do well in. The urban ones, exactly. Austin, Houston, Dallas. All the smaller counties in the north, east, on the west, etc., haven't come in. These are all Republican ones. And if you look at Austin, 90% of the votes have already been counted. And it's giving the Democrats a good lead. But there's not going to be a big increase in the Democrat lead in Texas from these strongholds. So it's now going to be defending that lead. And I'm not sure, with 60-65% of the votes counted so far, all of these are early votes, whether Texas is something that you could say is going to go Democrat right now. I think it's not that clear. I think if what the New York Times is saying on Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, then we are really in for what Dorab said, a fight about the three states that went Republican last time: Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin.
I think this one, that Georgia is a huge, just like Florida, because the polls projected Democrats were going to win there, and they are not winning. The Republicans are holding on to that. Let's bring in Clovis Casali, a journalist. And Clovis, we know that journalists are better than psephologists and pollsters. What's your current reading of the situation with Florida and Georgia going to Trump, but Texas looking more like it's going to Biden? It's not what the polls were expecting at this moment, right?
The race is extremely tight here. What I can tell you, it's neck and neck, but it does seem that Trump has a very slight advantage, according to the governor of Florida. Well, Donald Trump, the incumbent president, has won Florida, but it seems that these results are not exactly definite, so one needs to remain cautious. I'm currently here in Miami, in South Beach, and I met today in South Beach with Democratic voters who are extremely worried about the outcome of the election. They thought that Donald Trump would contest whatever result would be if it was unfavorable to him. Then I met in Little Havana, in the area where you have a very strong Cuban American community, voters who are diehard Republicans and who were fiercely behind Donald Trump. These Cuban Americans and Hispanics I met in Miami all told Donald Trump is simply the best man for the job, one man who is taking America in the right direction. That's, of course, not the point of view of all the people here in Florida, but Donald Trump and Joe Biden neck and neck, it does seem, with possibly a slight advantage for Donald Trump. Florida, very important. 29 electoral votes, crucial for the US president in his bid for re-election, if he is to reach that magic number of 270 electoral votes. Donald Trump needs Florida. It's probably not the same for Joe Biden, who's got different paths to victory, possibly.
Right. Clovis, just a question, though, about what could have led to this Republican edge in Florida, because in the early polls or the mail-in ballots, it looked like the Democrats had built up a big cushion in Florida. They claim to have improved their ground game much more than in 2016. But what do you think are the reasons that it actually seems to be leaning towards Trump?
Well, first it has to be said that the Sunshine State was won by Donald Trump 4 years ago against Hillary Clinton. It was a very slight margin, and it always is the case in Florida, it has to be said. Another important point, Florida usually picks the person who will then become the U.S. president. When you look at the history of U.S. presidential elections, it always is the case. So that's why Florida is such an important battleground state. Also worth pointing out that there's been a lot of early voting. We're talking maybe 60% of registered voters in Florida who got to cast their ballots before Election Day. And that means that we could get the results very quickly tonight, because the rules in Florida are such that the early voting could be counted before Election Day, meaning that made the work of officials easier. Anyway, if it is confirmed that Donald Trump has won Florida, it's good news for him, but it doesn't mean that the battle is lost for Joe Biden and the Democrats.
Okay. Prannoy, just thanks very much, Clovis. Prannoy, just very quickly, before we move on, we've got tweets now from the two main candidates, and in a way the tweets sum up the characteristic of both these candidates. Trump, as always, in all caps, all capitals, we are looking really good all over the country, thank you. And Joe Biden, this is our moment to prove that love is more powerful than hate, hope is more powerful than fear, excuse me, light is more powerful than dark. Prannoy.
You know, Vasu, yeah, it's like, I mean, they can keep hoping and they keep claiming, but there's still a long way to go. But we can just bring up Virginia. That is a real amazing turnaround in favor of Trump. Just look at Virginia. That's South Carolina, that's as expected, no problem. Virginia, if we can just get a hold of. Virginia is actually projected as a safe Democratic state. Here it is. Look, the Democrats won by 6% last time. They were projected to win by 8% this time. And now the Republicans are being projected to gain and take over Virginia with its 13. And, you know, they're talking about the projection, polls projected that the Democrats would have a margin of victory here of 12%. So if any poll has got, if polls have ever got anything wrong, they've got Virginia totally wrong, if that trend continues. Remember, these are still early days in counting.
Virginia is reporting only 15% of count so far. And the largest county, Fairfax County, is reporting very low vote count. Virginia is right outside DC.
Prannoy, maybe
Government workers. So that is what it made it traditionally democratic. Now one doesn't know whether what surprises me is why should the rural areas come in late? There's so few votes to count. I mean, it's not counting by hand. So what surprised me that where you have, say, 50,000 people in a constituency versus 500,000, why shouldn't the rural areas not come in first? They are the areas of strength for Trump. And many states, they're not coming in early enough. They're coming in later.
No, but Dorab, I've just heard that most of the rural states are coming slow because most of the counting apparently in rural states is being done by Parsis. I don't know, they go out there, they thought the Parsis would be, honest and accurate, but they didn't realize how slow they were. Quickly take a short break before Dorab replies. See you in a moment from now.
Welcome back. The world is watching as the election results in America unfold, and it's turning out to be every bit of a nail-biter as many had expected. Joining our panel, Prannoy, is Kishore Mehbubani, who's Distinguished Fellow, Asia Research Institute, and author, is joining us. Thanks very much, Kishore, for being on the show. Now, I know, Kishore, we're still waiting for the results to crystallize, but it's not looking as bad for Trump as perhaps the pollsters had expected. It's a very broad question, Kishore, but if we are going to have Trump 2.0, what do you think it's going to mean to the world order?
You're absolutely right. My Democratic friends are getting nervous. They were expecting some good wins early on, but it looks as though they're going to lose Florida to Trump. And I think we should be psychologically ready for Trump 2.0. But I can tell you that for most countries in the world, Trump 2.0 would mean 4 more years of unpredictability. And I think, frankly, for most countries, 4 more years of predictability is better than 4 more years of unpredictability. So that will be the psychological effect. And as a very senior European figure told me in private, Kishore, if Trump is re-elected, it's the death of the West. So there'll be profound changes that flow from Trump 2.0.
Okay. Prannoy.
I think I totally agree that this is not exactly an ideal start for the Democrats today. Texas, let me make it very clear, would be a huge thing for the Democrats. Let's have a look at Texas. But I want to make it very clear that while a couple of US channels and media houses are forecasting a Democrat victory in Texas, currently the lead is very narrow. It was less than 1% a short while ago. It's now at about 1.5%, and there's still 40% of Texas to be counted. So while this could be a huge, when we say Democratic gain, that's just a projection. And remember, 40% of this is still to be, of the state, the votes are still to be counted. So the only bit of good news for the Democrats, maybe again, it's too early to call. Joining us now is the one and only Maya Mirchandani. Maya, are you online and ready? Have you woken up?
Been awake for quite some time and
So what's your take so far?
Well, I've been too hesitant to make predictions on this election. So I've said quite some time it will be too close to call. I sort of tend to see from numbers coming in that kind of, that's to be the case, really. I do think that we're seeing in certain states, like Texas, for example, signs of a flip. And I think that's got to do with a lot of things. One is that there's an immigrant population that's actually coming out in large numbers to vote in Texas. The other thing is that you see a large amount of retired people from California, from the tech community west, moving there because Texas has lower tax rates than California, and that triggered a wave of people moving to Texas who come from Democrat states, and the demographic has somehow right about Texas turning purple. I think we might actually see it turn blue in this election. Although, you know me, I've known me for a long time. I never call elections. I just wait till come in, Prannoy.
Yeah, absolutely right, Maya. Cautious as ever, and quite rightly so. We'll take a short break while we catch up with which states are speeding up their counting and whether states are changing hands as the counting continues. Back in just a moment. See you then. Right, welcome back. Let's do a quick update on what's been happening so far. Things are changing already. It's very, very uncertain because counting is carrying on, and because of ballot voting this time, the counting can be quite skewed, and also they come from different areas in a state. But let's just anyway have a look at what's happening in each of these states. Look at Michigan. Michigan is amazing. Although the Republicans won it last time, the Democrats, the polls suggested the Democrats were going to win this easily with an 8% margin, and the Republicans are leading right there. Michigan 16, very, very important. That is a turn up for the books as far as the polls are concerned. Pennsylvania, a big gain so far. Again, this may change for the Democrats. The Republicans had won it last time, but the polls were saying the Democrats would win this by 4%, and at the moment they are leading there. Let's move on to Florida. This is the big story of the morning. Almost everything has been counted, and while the polls said the Democrats were going to win here, the Republicans, like last time when Trump beat Hillary Clinton here, and that was a big change in the whole election, Trump is holding on to Florida. Completely opposite to what the polls said. What about North Carolina? Here, this is a good gain for the Democrats. They'll be pleased with this as well. Although the polls did actually forecast this, so it won't come as a surprise, but it will be a pleasant change compared to what they've been seeing in Florida. Now let's move on to South Carolina. Standard traditional Republican, and yes, they've held on to it, and they were projected to hold on by a margin of 7%, 52 to 45. Moving on, New Jersey, solid Democrat, you can move on. This is just standard and expected. Winning by 20% was the projection. Texas, now this is really interesting. There's still a long way to go. The margin of lead that Biden has in Texas is just about 1.5%, and there's still 40% of the state to be counted. So when it's ticked and again and projected, it's really that can definitely change. This is expected. Illinois, traditionally Democrat, they were expected to win this by 16%. They're holding on to this, and they won it last time as well. Delaware, again, exactly the same, traditionally Democrat, and they're holding on to it. It's amazing how the states in America, many of them are not at all swing. They don't change from one election to the other, and Delaware is just one of those. Alabama, again, solidly, always historically Republican and projected to hold still. Massachusetts, Democrat, again, solidly always has been projected to hold. No surprise. So we should focus a bit on the surprises. This is not a surprise. Again, solidly, traditionally Republican, and they are projected to hold on to this. I think if we look at, actually there are one or two which are surprised. If we try and get up Virginia, not West Virginia, but Virginia, that is amazing. If we can have a look at that. And Ohio and Texas, these are, so we're just getting hold of Virginia. Just have a look at that. Virginia was won by the Democrats last time, projected to be won by the Democrats this time by 8%, and the Republicans are ahead here. Okay, it's 13, but it's projected, again, this can change. Baj wants to have a comment, and maybe he's got an update on this.
Yeah, I think Dorab said this a few minutes ago. Fairfax County, which is the one that borders Washington, is the big Democratic county in this state. And out there, only 20% of the votes have come in. So I would say that, it's far too early to even think of Virginia being a battleground state at the moment. I think we have to wait much longer. You also mentioned Michigan in one of the graphics showing that the Republicans were ahead. Again, the count here is very low. And if you look at a place like Detroit, it's showing that it's pink just now. So it's showing a lead for the Republicans. But Detroit will not be pink. I mean, it has a huge black population. There's no question of Detroit being. So it's very early on these two states, I feel.
Absolutely true. But what's interesting about Virginia, one second, just what's interesting about Virginia, yes, there's still a long way to go. I think more than 50% of the votes to be counted, but the lead at the moment for the Republicans is 18%, which is like, that can also change. But, okay, let's take a quick break. By the time we come back, it may have changed. We'll see you again in a moment. 18% lead. Let's see if it changes. It could, because there's still a long way to go in Virginia. Baj is quite right. Welcome back. Just to keep reiterating the key point in the early hours of our early hours and the early hours of counting in America on Tuesday night. Florida, the very, very important state that actually almost considered to be what changed Hillary's fortunes. 93% has been counted and Trump is leading there. And the Democrats said, look, 2020 polls, the Democrats were said to be going to win this according to the polls, 49 to 47. But the Republicans, this is a big trend in the morning that will please Donald Trump a lot. Right, Dorab?
Yes, it will. I mean, he can't win without Florida. Now I think that if the Democrats have to have any hope, there's Ohio actually where they're leading, which is about, I think, 17 electoral votes. This is an area they could concentrate on. Texas is getting tighter and tighter by the minute. So I think, again, going to come down in the end to the northern blue wall. And I think that's what's going to decide. Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, they are the states that will decide what finally happens. But I think Trump is doing very well vis-a-vis the polls. The polls
right
are
now, Texas
once again underestimating it.
Dorab? Yeah, Texas got over 60% of votes counted. Last time we looked at it, it was 40%. And Democrats are still holding on to it. But is it, how big is the margin there? Is it very narrow?
Very small. But Colorado, which is another state, you start got to looking at all the small states to make up for Florida. For instance, Colorado, Biden is leading by a lot. He's got to pick up small states to make up for the loss. The big state like
Just
Florida.
Let's focus on Texas for a minute.
Fine.
Just let's focus on Texas. Amitoj, you've got an update on the current situation.
Here's what's happened in the last 10 minutes. What's happened in Texas is that Donald Trump actually took a lead of 1,200 votes, and then 5 minutes later, Biden retook that lead and he has a lead of about 5,000 votes right now. 60% of the votes are in. What one needs to remember, and I was in Houston in October when Howdy Modi happened. Houston is the epicenter. San Antonio is there, and all these major cities out there in Texas are the ones that you're seeing the votes come in from. And we are seeing very clearly that the suburbs of Texas, so that's where you're going to get a red wave. Those are the votes that are going to come. They're still to come. That is where you're going to see Donald Trump retaking that lead. And I just want to make two quick points. The polls have got it wrong, or if I can be more gentle on them, I can say one thing, that they're within the margin of error. So they haven't really got it wrong. That's what they usually say, right? So with Florida happening, and I'm giving you another update, a latest update that we're getting. I'm looking at a particular county in Florida, Osceola. Osceola is a county which is an important county where Biden is leading just by about 30,000 votes right now. But there's been a particular situation there. I can't get into what it is, but I do know it's got to do with an outage, an electricity outage. Now, that could potentially mean that we'll have a slightly delayed result in that very key constituency. That's another update. And there's one more thing.
Regain the lead. Trump has regained the lead in Florida.
Yes.
But again, it's just 0.5%. But and there's 64% of Florida has been counted. So you're right, just going back and forth. Vasu.
But Florida is a big one. It's already a big
Texas.
Yeah.
Prannoy, just a quick update on Texas. According to the New York Times, they've already counted 73% of the vote. And it's 49.4% to Trump and 49.3% to Biden. That's how close it is. This is New York Times.
My God. Right. That is very, very close.
It's going to be the new Florida. It's going to be the new Florida, where they go to court to make the count in the end.
One thing on Ohio, Prannoy, Nate Silver is saying that Biden's lead has now shrunk to 3.5% as in-person voting is being counted. Earlier, it was ballots that had been mailed-in ballots and early voting. So he's not saying that Ohio is going to go Democrat.
Ohio is going to go Democrat. That is a big,
it's
big gain for the Democrats. Too close. You're not yet saying, okay, fine. Yeah, there's it was just
also, Prannoy,
a very, very narrow lead and a long way
on
to
Michigan.
go. Yeah.
Prannoy, just an update on Michigan. You're talking earlier about Virginia, which is a blue state which might be heading red, and the huge 20 percentage point gap between Trump and Biden, even though it's early polling. Look at Michigan. Again, only 19% of votes counted though, but again a 20 percentage point between Trump and Biden, according to the New York Times. Trump is at 60% approximately, and Biden is only at 40%.
Yeah, but Detroit hasn't come in.
That is amazing, because the polls were saying that Democrats would win this by 8% margin, and you're saying there's a 20% lead for the Republicans at the moment. But how much you said was counted?
Yeah. Only 19%.
Detroit hasn't come in. Detroit hasn't come in.
3% of Detroit has come in as yet. So I think we should be very careful on this one.
Yeah. Actually, we should be careful on every single one.
In Georgia,
Except
I just wanted to add one more update. Georgia has been what Ohio has been for the Democrats. Everyone thought that Georgia would be a lot closer in fact, the Democrats. They were calling in for the Democrats by just about 2 points, and they were calling Ohio as a complete tie. You've seen the surprise in Ohio, but there's still a long way to go in Ohio. We're looking at a 330,000 vote lead in Ohio for the Democrats, but 55% of the votes have been counted, so there's a long way to go. But in Georgia, one of the main counties has still not been counted, and that's a Democratic county, which is why the Democrats are saying right now, hold your horses, it's going to be a little closer in Georgia. For the moment, it has been a surprise that the Republicans have such a big lead in Georgia. And Ohio is 18 votes, electoral votes. You're looking at Georgia's votes also, which are very critical. I think this is going down to the wire. We're going to be here a long, long time.
Prannoy, no Republican has won the presidency without Ohio in God knows how many years. They have to win Ohio to get the presidency.
And how many people have become president
Except-
without Florida and Ohio? Very, very few since the Second World War.
But you know, just
So
to
Ohio, 60% has been counted, and the polls are wrong there as well. Massachusetts, it's a standard stuff. You know, it's nothing unexpected. Here's Ohio. Let's just focus on that a bit again. Projected by the polls for a narrow victory. It's a swing state, and at the moment, with 60% of the votes counted, Democrats are leading. Do we know how much they're leading by? Baj?
Sorry?
about 300,000.
I can.
He's leading by
How much percent?
300,000.
No, percent.
Percent is, sorry,
Okay.
Biden is
We'll come back to
about
that.
74,000 votes. Up.
No. In
So
Ohio, he's leading by
3%
just
lead
about
for
1.90%.
3% lead for the Democrats, and 60% counted. So it's still very vulnerable. Very vulnerable. Yes, but it is a very important state. So Maya, at the moment, it really is anybody's game, right? It's just the changes are happening. Of course, the polls seem to be wrong in a number of cases, but again, as Baj and Dorab keep pointing out, a lot of counting still to be done in different areas, and that changes the entire complexion. These are not
That's right. So
randomized
Prannoy,
samples. These are actual votes, but from different areas. Yeah.
That's right. So, I mean, I have two comments. You know, for example, Ohio, which you've been saying, Ohio, Kentucky, all these part of the sort of rust belt of America, Appalachian values. I urge everyone on this panel
to read a book called The Hillbilly Elegy by J.D. Vance, the Republican who grew up in that part of the United States, talking about how there was this core population of Democratic voters who actually swung Republican because of the fact that they perceived themselves as having been left out of Social Security, of healthcare, of education, and things like that, and therefore the core base that Trump kind of garnered in the last election. They were very, very clear supporters of Bernie Sanders in 2016. And that was because of the confidence that those voters would likely to swing Bernie Sanders' way. Hillary's campaign was actually criticized for having ignored, states like Ohio and Kentucky. And I think we're seeing the fact
I'll just
that
interrupt
Biden
you
has
for a
made some-
second there.
Yeah, sure.
I just interrupted Maya for a second. Before the voting was counting had started, the bookies were saying 60% chance Biden would win and only a 40% chance Trump would win. At this moment, the bookies' odds are saying 65% chance Trump will win. Trump will be the next president, and only 35% chance Biden. A complete flip. Dorab, the bookies know more than you?
Always.
Impossible.
Because they put their money where their mouth is.
They put their money where their mouth is. My
But,
God, that is a
Dorab,
huge change. 60-40 to 40-65, 35-65. Yeah. Go ahead, Vasu.
No, just a question to all of you, but I mean, if Dorab wants to take it or anybody, about the pollsters possibly getting it wrong, because there's been a lot of talk about how the pollsters tried to correct their methodology after 2016. They were going after demographics which they hadn't fully tapped in 2016. They were going after shy Trump voters. In fact, Nate Silver famously said that there's no concept of shy Trump voters anymore. They're not shy about going public with their affiliations. Despite that, we do seem to be seeing a repeat of that. How do you explain that, Dorab?
Don't have any idea at all, frankly. But on the shy voter, Baj and I have different points of view. My point is that if the national polls are correct, and nobody's disputed those last time, the national polls were right. The state-wise they went wrong. So the question of the shy voter, he must exist in the national poll too. Why doesn't he exist there? Now let's take why the states are going. I think there's samples of 600 and 700 per state. It is true that many people put several samples together, but still a sample of 600 in a state as large as Florida. Now you could do 600 in New York because you don't have to poll. You just got to poll 10 guys walking on Central Park. But in Florida, I mean, you just need much, much larger samples. We are used to larger samples. They are not. So I think it's a sampling problem. I just don't know what, I can't frankly think of anything else other than a sampling problem. And the enormous variety within a state. Say Florida in the north is more like Georgia. In the south is more like all the guys who come down from the north to retire there. So the whole state, a state is broken to different parts. I'm sure they try and fix it, but obviously it's not being fixed. Just don't know what's happening. They'll keep on doing postmortems until they get it right.
But also, just to zoom out a bit, Baj and Maya also come in on this, that indeed, if it does appear that we're heading to Trump 2.0, try and explain that, because here's someone who completely mishandled the pandemic, the economy is faltering, host of other problems that one could list will take forever, and yet he seems to be coming back.
Bas, I think that's something we're all kind of grappling with across the world, where you see
the idea of the illiberal, authoritarian, populist politician making significant gains with the electorate. They're feeding on a sense of fear, a sense of grievance. I mentioned the hillbilly elegy just a little while ago, and I think that really kind of gives you an indication of how white America is poor. White America is feeling left out of the Democrat base, I mean, which is looking at immigrants and the welfare of minorities. And this whole idea that the minority is being appeased at the cost of the majority, we see parallels in the Indian electorate as well. So, you know, this is one of the most polarizing elections America has seen, and it's polarizing on the issue of race. It's polarizing on the issue of sort of, you know, the elite draining the swamp. He's coming back with that language. And most recently, I don't know if you paid attention to the last 2 days of the campaigning, as we saw attacks in France and then in Austria yesterday as well. This notion that Trump is telling, you know, white Americans that he's going to save them from terrorists. So you're kind of stirring the pot of fear and grievance and using that to make gains. And you're using every tactic in the book. You're using fake news, misinformation, disinformation, and just whipping up a frenzy.
Vasu, to take off on Maya's point.
Baj, could it also be... Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Baj. Yes.
There's an exit poll that shows 58% of white voters have voted for Trump. It also shows 36% of Hispanics have voted for Trump. Now, 58% is really high. It's much higher than people were expecting. People said that people over 65 were likely to vote for Biden because of Corona. Well, the poll shows 63% of them voted for Trump. 45 to 64, 55% voted for Trump. These two age groups make up 60% of the voting population. So, frankly, the white vote has gone to Trump. And there's this Cato study where 65% of Americans said, we have deplorable views. Now, you can take it from there what those deplorable views are.
Okay. All right. Let me go across. We also have Preeti Davra joining us. She's Managing Director, Asian Century Communications. She's also spokesperson for Howdy Modi. Everyone remembers that big event. Ravi Agarwal, Managing Editor of Foreign Policy, is also joining us. Preeti Davra, are we heading for Trump 2.0, and how would you explain it? Because as we're just saying, everyone's trying to wrap their heads around the fact that here's someone whose track record when it came to handling the pandemic was not great, economy faltering, and yet we're looking at the possibility of Trump 2.0. Is it also perhaps the fact that just like in 2016, the Democrat candidate that they put against him, you know, perhaps a little more likable than Hillary, but just not up to the match?
Good morning. Good morning to all your viewers. I just want to say I think people have to pay a little bit more attention to what Trump's economic record was before the pandemic. And I think that this vote that has come in surprisingly more for him than was expected is a result, I think, one of the trade deals which, he scrapped the trade deals that were beneficial to America. He has talked about the oil industry and how he will keep the energy jobs going. He has basically talked about the Islamic terrorism and come across as very strong on that, destroying ISIS. And also, of course, the conservative Christians in America. I think he appeals a lot to them. And people are complex, so I think they're not voting on a single issue. And on that framework, both economically, culturally, I think that Trump still appeals broadly to a large swath of this population that seem to be voting for him.
Okay. Ravi Agarwal, again, early days yet. It's still a close contest in many states. But if indeed it is heading for Trump 2.0, how would you see it? Would you see it in keeping with the fact that there is this rising curve of authoritarianism and certainly America hasn't lost its appetite for it?
Look, I think it's way too early to go there. I think this race could still go absolutely anywhere. I know there are a lot of people who wanted to call it early, especially if Florida fell. But the reality is that where we stand right now is that it looks like maybe Florida might go Republican. The other two early states that we were looking at very closely, North Carolina and Georgia, are still very much up in the air. So I think it's too early to draw larger extrapolations from anything we've seen so far. But all of that said, what's clear is that this is a competitive race in much of America. And I think that's something that's easy to forget for those of us who live in cities like New York or Washington, D.C. And for a vast part of the American electorate, what they're looking at is how this matters to them in terms of either economics or in terms of, domestic policies that matter for them day to day. And they think less, I think, about issues such as foreign policy or, you mentioned a wider trend towards authoritarianism. I don't think they think about those things as much as us pundits and analysts tend to think about that.
Sure. Dorab, to the point about whether the Democrats once again couldn't come up with somebody who seemed to charge up their base and certainly charge up those who might be fence-sitters or undecideds, similar to 2016. Was Joe Biden perhaps not the best choice given the situation?
Vasu, we are aware of the fact that more Democratic voters are voting against Trump than for Biden. It is also a fact.
Just 1 second, just some breaking news.
Fine.
I don't know if you, I know that both Dorab and Baj are very interested in the Senate races. So the first Senate race that has been flipped and won by the Democrats is in Colorado. The Republican Senator Cory Gardner has lost and the Democrat has won there. That's the first one to flip. The polls did say this would lean towards a Democrat senator, and that has actually happened. So Dorab, your polls are right. When the polls are right, it's yours. When they're not, there's some sampling problem. Chalo. Carry on, carry on.
I don't know what I was talking about. Vasu, can you repeat the question? Sorry, I forgot. You broke my train of thought.
Prannoy has a habit of doing that.
Yeah, I've forgotten the question. I really haven't answered.
Vasu has forgotten the question. No, he was saying, is Biden not the best candidate? They could have chosen a better candidate.
I was talking about Biden's winnability. Biden's winnability. But anyway.
Yeah. But no, let me check. Sorry. Vasu, let me please complete that. On that, Hillary was more disliked than Trump. Biden is more liked than Trump. Of the people who disliked both Hillary and Trump, the vast majority broke for Trump last time. Biden has a much better positive score than has Trump. That is the point I was making. But again, if the polls are wrong, all this is wrong too. That's the issue.
Sure.
That is the issue.
This has gone back to
okay. Prannoy, you want to go back to the
1% lead,
the numbers,
a 1% lead to Republicans, and with 70% of the votes counted, a 1% lead to Republicans, or 75% of the votes counted. So a 1% lead, still vulnerable, but that'll be a big disappointment for the Democrats. So we'll take a short break and come back in just a moment and give you updates on and the implications of all of this and see who's really leading and which way is it heading. It's still early days, but we'll get an update and see whether trends are becoming clearer in just a moment from now. See you then.
Welcome back. Is Donald Trump going to confound pollsters and pundits once again like he did in 2016 and pull off a stunning second term? That's the big question that we, the world, is actually waiting to hear an answer to, as some of these polls, particularly in crucial states like Florida and Texas, extremely tight, but giving still Trump an edge. We have Sriram Lakshman with us. He's the U.S. correspondent for The Hindu, joining us from Washington, D.C. Sriram, what are you seeing and hearing, and what are you picking up?
Thanks, Srinivasan. Well, you said this is the question the world is looking to for an answer for. And I think right now people are a lot more coy this year, making predictions about who's going to win the Electoral College this early in the evening. And the reason is we haven't got numbers. The major news organizations, many of whom got it wrong last time, haven't yet called the major states, the battleground states, the crucial states like North Carolina, Ohio, Florida, Pennsylvania, Texas, Michigan. They haven't yet called those states, and that's where the election is going to be won or lost. The states that have been called so far are states that we thought would anyway go to Biden or to Trump, or were likely to go to Biden and Trump. So my answer to your question is it's just too soon to say right now. And based on what happened in 2016, I don't see many people sticking their necks out and making a prediction on who's going to win the Electoral College vote. I certainly am not at this point in the evening.
Sure, but what do you think, before we open it up, we've got Baj, Dorab, Maya all still with us. In the event that we're looking at a path to victory, a second path to victory for Trump, what do you think is working for him, given that, as we know, going in, the odds seem heavily stacked against him, with coronavirus cases and deaths in America surging again, with the economy still faltering, unrest on the streets? Clearly, that doesn't seem to have been strong enough factors to have made a second path to victory for him impossible.
Yes. So there are certainly paths open to victory for Trump. It's just that Biden has more paths and his path to victory is broader. Trump would have to hold on to Arizona, Florida, Georgia, Iowa, North Carolina, Ohio, and he'd crucially need to win Pennsylvania as well. Srinivasan, last week on Saturday, Trump did 4 rallies in Pennsylvania on one day. He went back to Pennsylvania, I believe it was on Monday. The Biden camp finished up in Pennsylvania, and there's a reason for this. Both states are looking at Pennsylvania as crucial to their victory. So literally in terms of winning, sure, that would work for Trump. But also, we have to look at who turned out at the polls today. Democrats typically vote early, and Republicans typically vote on Election Day, which was today. It's still November 3rd here. And we need to look at whether white men, that's still a constituency that Trump's been holding on to. We have to look at how many seniors have defected, sure, to, some of them have defected to Biden. We have to see how many still stick with Trump this year.
Okay, Dorab, Baj, you want to come in on how it's now shaping up? Prannoy also back with us to look at how the numbers are shaping up, particularly in those crucial battleground states.
Let Baj go first, I'll come later.
I think all the southern battleground states, Texas, Florida, North Carolina, Georgia, Trump is holding all of it. I would be very surprised now if Trump were to lose these, which means we are now really talking about the northern states between Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, Iowa, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. There's 1 or 2 southern Sunbelt states that still have to come because they're more west. One is Arizona, that should be coming in soon, and the other is Nevada. Nevada is a Democrat state
Baj,
last
you're
time.
absolutely right. Let me just give you a quick update on those battleground swing states and just see what's happening there. And it's generally good news for Trump. Florida, let's look at that. More or less fully counted. It's Republicans are going to win that. It was a polling error, but it's been a complete turnaround and a huge victory for Trump there. Georgia, where we have about 50%. We'll just focus on Georgia for a second. Republicans are ahead there. Now moving on to Michigan. Again, this is a swing state which was meant to go to the Democrats. Republicans here are leading by 13% with about 30% of the votes counted. So that can change, but 13% lead. Look at Minnesota. Here the Democrats are leading. They're holding on to this swing state, which is very important for them. They were meant to win by 9%. They're at the moment leading with 30% of the votes counting. They're leading by about 30%. So Democrats are pretty solid in Minnesota. And let's look at another swing state, North Carolina. 80% of the votes have been counted, and it's just neck and neck. The lead that we're showing there for the Democrats is 0.15, and there's still 13% of the votes to be counted. So that's not a certainty at all. Pennsylvania, about 20-25% of the votes have been counted, and the Republicans are leading in Pennsylvania now. It's just gone ahead of that. It's changed, so it's just going back and forth, but it's a very narrow, plus or minus 1 and 2%. Wisconsin, about 19% has been counted. At the moment, the Democrats are leading, but it's again neck and neck. Earlier on, the Republicans were leading. In fact, I've got an update saying at 30% vote counted, the Republicans are ahead in Wisconsin by 3%. So basically, these are going back and forth. But look at that. The poll saying the Democrats should win this by 8%. And at the moment, it's very, very narrow. So all these, basically the bottom line is, as you go to these Democrat projected swing states, Republicans are doing much better than the polls projected and actually looking like winning many of them. So that's bad news. Now looking at the Republican projected swing states, that means where Republicans are projected to win by a very narrow margin, like this one, Ohio, Republicans projected to win by just 1%, and we have, I think, about 75% of the votes counted, and the Republicans are ahead by about 2% there. So they're holding on to their swing state. And now Texas. Let's have a look at Texas. Texas, so far, about 60% has been counted. If we move on to Texas, let's see. That's a huge state. Republicans were projected to win by 2%. At the moment, they are leading by 1.5 with 40% of the votes counted. So both their 60% of their votes counted. So 40% left, and the Republicans are ahead by 1.5. So both the swing states, Republican projected swing states, are currently narrowly being held, or Republicans are in the lead. Let's go back to Georgia, where the Democrats, this is actually a Democrat swing state. At the moment we have about 50% of the vote counted, but the lead that the Republicans have here is over 10%. So there's still a long way to go to count, but with a lead of 10%, it's going to be a lot for the Democrats to change. So the bottom line is that the Republicans are doing very well in the Democrat swing states, and they need them. They need at least 3/4 of them to win the election. At the moment, they're heading in that direction, but we're talking about only about 40 to 50% of the votes counted so far. So it's all variable. But it's currently, if you're a Democrat, you'd be worried. If you're a Republican, you'd be happy. Maya.
No, can I make a point, please?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead, Gaurav.
Yeah. You know, the Democrats still haven't lost any state that they carried in 2016. They're just not winning them, right? So the Democrats have another path to victory, which is get states like Colorado, which you already announced the senators out, the Republican senators out. Arizona, which they haven't had since God knows almost 25 years, where Maricopa County, which has 60% of the population, they were big leads. So they have another path to victory, so long as they hold on to all the Clinton states. And then they want part of the blue wall. Because, you know, if currently Mr. Trump is holding on to everything that he had, the question is, so is Ms. Clinton. You have to ensure, Biden has to ensure that he picks up 2 or 3 of those Sun Belt states, a couple of them, and then goes up the north and picks up one of those 3 or 4 states. Minnesota was likely to be close, but doesn't seem to be close. So I think she has wider paths to victory than Mr. Trump, though he is on his path, absolutely on his path at the moment. But if he drops something in the West, then he has a problem.
Actually, on Dorab's point, if he holds
just one second. I'm just that if the Democrats hold all the states that they held in 2016, that would be a total of 217. Yes. They would therefore need to get to 270 another 53. Yes. They need those 53 seats or electoral college votes out of the swing states. Now there are 139 Democrat swing states where they are most likely to win. So they must win 53 out of those 139. And at the moment, whatever results are coming in, they are leading in, I'll just tell you how many. They're leading in 15, which is North Carolina, 15 electoral college. They're leading in 10, Minnesota 25. They're leading in 25 and they need 53. And we've got no information yet on Arizona, Iowa, and Nevada.
You got Colorado.
So
why don't you add that? The senator is lost, you said, right? The senator is lost.
But Colorado was Democrat last time.
What? Was it? Or was it?
Yeah. Prannoy, we have...
Yes, it was Democrat.
Christine
they won that by a margin
us.
of 13.8%.
Okay, Prannoy.
Yeah.
We have, Prannoy, if I may, we have Seema Sirohi joining us from New York. She's columnist for the Economic Times. But let's start with Christine Emba is also here with us, opinion columnist, the Washington Post from Washington, D.C. Thanks very much, both of you, for joining us. Christine, turning out to be a real cliffhanger. Not quite as many of the polls projected a comfortable lead for Biden. What is your take on what's going on? And if indeed it appears to be that Trump has the edge, how would you explain it?
Well, right now it's pretty early in the game, frankly, and it's actually also hard to explain. The difficulty with the race this year is that a mixture of results coming in at a variety of times. Certain states are reporting first their electoral totals that they have received from in-person voting today, while they're still counting the overwhelming number of mail-in ballots that came over the past several weeks. Other states are doing the process in reverse. They've counted most of their mail-in ballots and are still tabulating the results from active visits to the polls today. So unfortunately, while I think many of us had hoped that there would be a Biden landslide or at least a decisive lead early in the night, it looks that we may end up waiting through the night and to the next day or even longer as the results are tabulated from all corners before we can actually say something definitive about who's winning.
Okay. Seema Sirohi, what's your take? Again, I know a lot of caveats, it's still early days and all of that. But would you like to take a shot at explaining how Trump has managed, I mean, perhaps we're not talking of victory yet, but how he's managed to narrow what initially was a substantial lead between Biden and him up until June, July. The lead was much wider, and it's just come right down to the wire just as America went out to vote.
Yes, I think he's doing better than expected because all the polls, as you said, showed a comfortable lead for Joe Biden. But I think what changed was the frantic campaigning that he undertook. where thousands upon thousands of people showed up, with no care about the pandemic, etc. And there was a lot of enthusiasm on the ground. It was really palpable, and he was going to places where factories have closed down, where jobs have been lost, and he talked about the economy, and he talked about the fact that if you vote for Joe Biden, it's going to be socialism. So he was able to flip the narrative somewhat, and I think that's what you're seeing. Then there's this question of the shy Trump voter. I quite believe that to be the case because, it's just not acceptable today in American society, in polite American society, to say that you might vote for Trump. Because then they think you're like, quote unquote, deplorable. So lots and lots of people are not telling the pollsters. So the two polls that had 2016 right are the ones that are predicting that Trump might come back from behind and win again.
Right. Christine, could that have been one of the factors that, that Seema spoke about, that towards the end, Trump went on this, very, very aggressive campaign, even though he just recovered from the coronavirus? He was all over the place, particularly hitting battleground states. And Joe Biden was still being fairly cautious about getting out there. Could that be one of the factors?
I mean, that could definitely be a factor. We really did see Trump barnstorming across the United States over the past 10 to 15 days. That said, one of the questionable things about this sort of last spurt of campaigning was that many of the sites that he went to were actually sites that should have been considered safe for him in the past, which bespoke some level of fear. Again, I think that's a great point, though, about the shy Trump voter. You're right, Seema, that there is on some level a bit of disapproval from at least perhaps what Trump voters might call elites for admitting that you're a Trump voter. But I think that one of the enduring questions about the American electoral system and tracking it right now is how polls operate. Polls can only be so granular. You have to invest a lot of money to make them more targeted. One of the things that we've seen in states like Florida, Arizona, and Texas is actually that polls may have underestimated the amount of Latino support for Trump and his support among other minorities. Again, more careful targeting might have identified this, but if things, turn out unexpectedly, one of the big questions from this election will be, how did we miss these people again?
Well,
okay.
I think.
And Christine, absolutely very last quick question before we let you go and we have to go into a break is, in the event that we're looking at Trump 2.0, and I know there's still very early doors yet, what does that mean particularly for the very fraught nature of race equations in America right now?
I think it becomes even more fraught, unfortunately. I think that if Trump does win a second term, it will be seen rather justifiably as an assertion of truth, the fact that his narrative of racial strife, of disharmony, of two sides fighting against each other is actually one that's shared by perhaps a majority of the American population. That, in fact, that sense of fear and perhaps even some level of ethno-nationalism is a majority-held view in the United States. We might have thought that we had progressed past that, and if we haven't, that will be something alarming and fearful that we will have to reckon with over the next 4 years.
Okay. All right, that's a somber note to take a break on, but we'll take a break and come back with many more interesting twists and turns in this election. Take a break. Back in a minute.
Welcome back. Actually, the situation is becoming clearer and clearer. It's now looking more and more like a Trump victory, and more like it's going to be very difficult for Biden to win this election. There's still a long way to go because counting is only 30% done, 40% done, or some places 50, 60% done. But the trends are becoming clear. And it needs a major change. Like Dorab said, maybe there are areas, because the counting is coming in faster in certain areas in a state and slower in other areas. But that's what the Biden camp will be hoping for. Just let's look at the data right now. The data at the moment is this is what the Republicans are currently heading for. There are 126 safe Republican seats. Let's say they get all those, 126. Remember, they need 270. So 126 safe Republican seats, let's put them in the bag for the Republicans. Then there are the 2 Republican swing states, and those are Ohio and Texas. That is 56 seats. And those, the Republicans are leading. They were projected to lead, but they were considered narrow victories, but they are leading there. That could change because early days, but that's 56. So 126 plus they're leading in another 56. Then in the Democrat swing states, by that we mean narrow victories projected for the Democrats. There are many states, 139 electoral college votes, and out of that the Republicans are leading in 91 electoral college votes out of the 139 they are leading in, and there are still 2 states where no information is in yet. So 126 safe, 56 Republican swing states and 91 Democrat swing states. The Republicans are leading in all of those. And to that, if you add 1 Democrat safe state, which is Virginia, where the Republicans are leading in that traditional Democrat safe state, Republicans are leading by 8%, but only 54% have been counted. Then, if you add all that up, 126 safe Republican, 56 Republican swing, 91 Republicans leading in Democratic swing states, and 1 Democrat safe state they're leading in. Republicans are basically sort of got in their pocket 286 states, electoral college votes in all these states. 286, remember they needed 270. Things can change. It really is early days. And it really is not a forecast, it's just a trend at the moment. And if you look at the other side of the coin, the Democrats, they have 217 Democrat safe states. Let's say they'll win all of those except this one that is already they're trailing by 8%. So they're leading in, say, they will win, let's say, 206 of those. Then you have the Democrat swing states, which remember, Republicans are leading in most of them now. And the Democrats are leading in only 2 of those, which have a 21 electoral college votes. So 206 plus 21, 227. 227 is what they're heading for. And the 2 which Democrat swing states where you've got no information on, and let's say they win those, that's another 17. So they're heading towards 244. So at the moment it's clear that the Republicans are trending 50 electoral college votes ahead of the Democrats. 50 electoral college votes. Early days, but Vasu, you've been saying what happens if we thought it was true. You should be a pollster. It looks like you were right from the beginning.
I am a pollster, at least for the next half an hour.
And to be honest, let me tell you, let me just tell you one more thing, that Radhika has been saying Trump is going to win. She's put it in writing everywhere. Baj has been very skeptical and has been saying Republicans are going to win.
Okay.
They're both, I think it's like a win-win, you know, that if the other side wins,
Yeah,
you feel
even
good.
I,
If the other
Prannoy, yeah. Even I had called it for Trump about 6 months ago, but that aside, if you just move a little beyond the how. Yes.
Can I just interrupt for one second?
In writing in my head.
Yeah, Baj.
Can I just
Let's
say
have Baj for a
that
second.
if you just move a, yeah, sorry, go ahead, Baj. Go ahead,
I
Baj,
just
go
want
ahead.
to say on Arizona, maybe the only bright spot for the Democrats. I just ran the numbers there. They have counted 75% of the vote, and there are about 800,000 votes left. The Democrats lead by 210,000 votes. So for the Republicans to win this state, they need to win 65% of the votes that remain, which is a bit of a tall order, but it can be done, I guess. But what I'm saying is this one looks like one of the brighter areas for them. So if Arizona comes through for them, it would be 11 electoral votes they didn't have last night.
Right. Prannoy, what I was saying was that moving away now from the what of what is happening to why, some of these exit polls that are coming in are giving you perhaps some hints as to why. So the Edison exit poll, and they're doing the polling for, in a sense, it's a kind of common poll they do for all the national media in America, is saying that Trump is doing better in 2020 with every race and gender except white men. White men down 5 points, white women up 2 points, black men up 4 points, black women up 4 points, and Latino men and women up 3 points each.
That's phenomenal.
So that's
That's phenomenal.
Pretty startling.
That's phenomenal. The question is, have the polls also closed? I mean, in California, the polls just closed. Are those exit polls included there? Exit polls include those people? Because then it's phenomenal performance. Because he's dropped nothing except for Arizona, and he might pick up Virginia. So he's where he is. I mean, he's not lost anything significant, and the Democrats have picked up nothing significant. They have to pick up all of Hillary's states, plus 2 or 3 more on the western side, southwest of the country, and they haven't done that. I mean, the betting odds are also in favor of the Republicans.
Right. Prannoy, we're also joined by M.R. Rangaswamy, who's the founder of Indiaspora, and Seema Serohi continues to be with us. M.R. Rangaswamy, again, just look at these exit polls and the remarkable story that they're telling you, that constituencies that many believed would be directly adverse to, if not hostile to Trump, black men and women, Latinos, seem to actually be voting in greater numbers. He seems to be gaining in these constituencies. What do you make of what's happened with the Indian diaspora? Because some of the early surveys suggested that despite this kind of apparent push, Trump, Modi and all of that, that the Indian community was still largely, traditionally, they've always been pro-Democrat, they were still largely with the Democrats. But any sense of how they may have gone this time?
Yeah, I think, compared to, thanks for having me, by the way, but compared to 2016, we did notice in our own survey an increase in the Trump voters from 16 to 22%. It was a small move. The question is, we need to see if it gets to 30% or something, which could happen. But I think the core Democratic voters have voted for Biden and Kamala Harris, and a large portion of the independents seem to have done the same. So I don't know if the move is big enough in the Indian community to the Trump side yet. But there's some indication that the Trump-Modi friendship has resulted in a movement, and the investment Trump made by coming to India and going to the Howdy Modi event, all that has made a difference. Question is it going to be enough? I see a lot of excitement in the community for Kamala Harris. In fact, a week ago, there was a big fundraiser for Kamala Harris where the community raised about $2 million. You can even see after Kamala Harris was nominated and announced, there was a big uptick in the money coming into Biden. So I think in general, the Democratic community, I would say the Indian community is still pretty much Democratic.
Right. But again, just opening up this question, Prannoy, Baj, Dorab, if any of you want to weigh in, that this seems almost counterintuitive, that ethnic minorities in America, African Americans, Hispanics, that you would think would have been even more hostile towards Trump now in his second term, going into the second election, actually seem to be leaning in a greater degree towards him. Again, if these exit polls are correct.
Yeah, I think so. I don't know about, this is M.R. Rangaswamy again, and I don't know about California. And, I live in San Francisco, and I know this state is very, very Democratic. So I'm not sure of the exit polls. But, Trump could have made a difference in the sense that he is saying there are opportunity zones. There's a platinum plan for blacks where they'll invest in those communities and so forth. So maybe, some of the blacks community is saying, hey, let's give this other side a chance. But I don't suspect it's in great numbers. Maybe it went from, I don't see the exact polls, but maybe it went from 10% to 20% blacks. But still, when you look at the majority of blacks and Latin voters, other than the Florida, issue, I think are primarily still with the Democratic Party.
Vasu, there's a study by two professors at Columbia on minorities voting for Trump. And they've written saying, one, minorities have strong antipathies to other minorities. Hispanics support legal immigration, law and order, and are basically very conservative. And they feel that a large number of blacks now are fed up having supported the Democrats for decades and not really got anything from it.
Okay. Also, Prannoy, we have live pictures coming in from outside the White House. Seems to be a considerable crowd that is gathered there. So there's some kind of crowds building up there. But Maya, yes. Maya, you wanted to come in. Go ahead, Maya.
Yeah, so one about the crowds. I mean, Trump has said he's hosting an election night victory party for about 400 people at the White House. I suspect some of those images are what are coming in. But I just want to draw a note of caution once again, which is that there are many people, especially more cautious analysts, who have predicted about 100 million votes have come in from postal ballots and early voting. While early voting in person have been counted and today's votes have been counted, many analysts have predicted a so-called Trump bump on election day. Let's not forget that mail-in ballots are going to be counted over the next few weeks. There are 300 cases in U.S. federal court that are challenging the validity of these postal ballots. Wisdom says that it is Democrats overwhelmingly who sent in their postal ballots early. And that could change the narrative entirely if and when they're all counted. That is why Trump has spent a lot of time on the campaign trail trying to discredit postal ballots, call them a fraud on the electorate, demanding that people go into vote. So in a sense, one did anticipate that the numbers coming in today would show that Trump bump, so to speak. We'll have to wait and see. I don't think, the race is too close to call. Trump might declare victory, but the Democrats will not concede this election until those postal ballots are counted or until they are adjudicated in the courts of America. So I think we're actually going to see a few weeks of tremendous unrest. I don't think this election is over today.
I think that's a very good cautionary note, actually, about the different kinds of votes being counted, and that in-person voting may be counted early, and those are predominantly or high percentage Republican. But at the moment, the trend honestly seems to be more and more towards Trump. But let's get an update from Amitoj. What are you hearing? Is it very close? Are people saying one side's winning, or it's too close to call still?
Well, the overwhelming thought is what Maya finished with, that it is too close to call. But I just want to make a few points very quickly. The first, the people that you saw outside the White House, the party that's happening for the Republicans, that's actually happening inside the White House. Outside the White House is the Black Lives Matter plaza, where you have in yellow very clearly written Black Lives Matter. And 2 hours ago, what we heard was that a lot of protesters had actually showed up there. So that gives you a sign of why outside the White House they actually put barricades that would not be, well, they're unfensible. You can't climb them. The other update that I want to give you is that, yes, pollsters get it wrong. And a guy called Robert Kahali, who is a pollster for Trafalgar, was the only one to get the last election right with 306. And this time he's projected 303 for Trump. And at this point, his current projection doesn't even include Wisconsin, which is going Trump's way right now. So that could go even further ahead. But then again, he predicted Arizona for the Republicans, which is right now going for the Democrats. AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, has actually won comfortable victory. It was expected 60%. But what this means is that the person Trump attacked the most is the face of the socialist idea that, Donald Trump keeps hammering over, that Joe Biden is actually a Trojan horse for the socialists. And that's why you've seen this backlash coming in from the Cuban community in Florida, which has made sure that Florida has gone towards the Republicans. That is another sign of that. Mitch McConnell, the super predator of the Republicans, the Senate leader, he is actually won. And that again means that they have their main man in the Republican Senate to be able to once again change the way the courts work. Everyone talks about the Supreme Court, but don't forget that Donald Trump is the first president in the history of America to actually put as many as 50 new federal court judges, one level lower than the Supreme Court. And all of them were white, not one black court, a person who was black, basically. Another scenario I just want to present, and don't get spooked. I know Halloween's just gotten up over, but 269, the tie, the super over, is a possibility. And in that case, because the House has now been won by the Democrats may, you think, have the advantage, but they won't, because out there in that particular tie situation of 269, what really happens is that each state carries one vote. And that's why it's going to be very critical to see what happens to the rest of the states. There's a 5-point lead in Ohio. That's very clearly in the favor of Donald Trump. And that also means that for the first time since 1960, you have again a situation that a Republican could carry Ohio and win. Since 1960. So that situation that we're talking about, yeah.
Amitoj, one question. When Congress votes or the House votes, which House votes? The one that is there now or the one that's going to come in, which is only sworn in on January 6th?
The new House. The short answer is the new House. But this is a very, very interesting question. I could go on and on about this because I've studied this a lot. But I want to make one other point. I've answered that question about it's going to be the new House that's actually going to decide. But again, it's going to be one vote per state. That's going to be interesting. I want to make a point about Michigan. You talked about how divisive America is right now. Just don't forget that a short while back, a Governor Whitmer of Michigan, there was a kidnapping plot against her. Okay, the governor in America is like the chief minister in India. And to think of this, it's very important. The polls were saying, you're going to have a Democratic victory. But the underlying feeling in that state was so clear because there were people, Republican supporters, who were walking into the state capitol with guns and literally saying, we want to protect democracy. So this is a very divided country, and one just needs to realize that the shy vote is not the shy vote. Now they've become the clever vote. They don't want to tell you. They're lying to the pollsters.
I don't know if you all have been following the congressional results as well, but Marjorie, I forget her last name, the QAnon member, has won her seat in the Congress. Conspiratorial, bigoted, white supremacists, they're winning.
That was a very safe seat. Actually, I don't think anyone competed against her. It was a clear seat for her. But talking about Governor Whitmer, 2 years ago, she won the state of Michigan with 400,000 votes majority in the state of Michigan. And now in the presidential thing, things are turning around. Just 2 years ago, she won. And she's very popular, but they're splitting their vote. One for the president. And if he wins Michigan, Trump wins Michigan, probably the Michigan Senator Peters, will also go down with him.
But I think the
With
Ram,
her
if I can just add, while Marjorie's
Prannoy.
seat may have been a safe seat, even the sort of more tempered Republican voices were not able to challenge her ticket. There has been a lot of rumblings within the U.S. Republican Party about the kind of supremacist, extreme right-wing leaning that the party has taken. They might be religious conservatives, but I don't think that there are many Republicans who are actually very concerned about the levels of social unrest that are being, let out onto the streets. And I think that challenge is something the Republicans are going to have to contend with, irrespective of which way this result goes. What is the party they envisage for themselves going into the future? It's not an easy question, and I think it's going to be one for the court. I think it's going to be one for the GOP in general.
Okay, we'll just take a short break. The point that we are seeing right now, Vasu, is that it looks like it's heading towards a Trump victory, subject to the important caveat and cautionary note that Maya pointed out. But it's looking like Trump. So what's becoming more and more important as this happens is what's going to happen in the Senate. And we'll discuss that when we come back. Because with a Republican Trump as the president and with total control of the Supreme Court, the Senate becomes a very, very key player in this game. Of course, it's too early to say Trump's going to win, but that's the trend. And we'll see the implications of a new America with a Republican president and a Republican Supreme Court. And that's where the Senate becomes very important. See you in a moment from now. Welcome back. I think Florida was a key signal. That victory for Trump signaled a big change in this election compared to the polls. And what's happening now in the bookies are now saying Trump will be the next president, 70% chance, and Biden 30% chance. Now, bookies are not always right. In fact, just about a month ago, they were saying 70% chance Biden. Now it's 70% chance Trump in the face of all this. Stock markets are up, futures markets are up. It looks increasingly as though Trump is going to be the next president, but there are a lot of ifs and buts to that. And I think Maya Mirchandani made that very clear. The different kinds of voting this time, many votes are going to take days to count, and there are many states still to come in. But let's just get a quick update on what the current projections are. And if we go through each state and we'll see what the situation is like, this is what it is. Now, so far we've got information of 422 out of 538. Now, when we say information on 422, some can be very little information, just 10% of the vote, 20% of the votes counted. But this is what it's looking like. Out of those 422, Biden is projected to lead in 148 and Trump is projected to lead in 274. Please be clear that these are not final figures. They can change as more and more votes are counted. It's like rounds of counting in Indian elections where you have leads and then results. So let's have a look. DC, traditionally Democrat, it always has been. The poll forecast said 91%, and yes, Biden is leading by a huge margin there. Delaware, traditionally Democrat. 3 seats, polls forecast Biden was going to win, and he is leading there. Now, Pennsylvania, that is a swing state, and it was projected by the polls, if you look on the right side, 50% to 46, a 4% margin for the Democrats. But Trump is leading in Pennsylvania, and that's a big one. That's a big change. New Jersey, solidly always has been traditionally Democrat, projected by the polls, 14 seats going to the Democrats, and they're in the lead. Georgia, projected again by the polls, a 2% lead for the Democrats, but Trump is leading clearly in Georgia. So those are 2 out of those 5 where the polls are wrong. I'm going to ask Dorab after this, what's going to happen to pollsters? 2 huge errors in 2 consecutive elections. Anyway, that comes for later, but Dorab, think about a good answer to that. We all want to know. Now, let's look at Connecticut. Clear projection, Connecticut, Massachusetts, and Maryland all projected to be Democrat, traditionally Democrat, and the Democrats are leading there. South Carolina, traditionally Republican, projected by the pollsters to be won by the Republicans, and they are leading there. New Hampshire, the other way around. Polls are correct. Biden is leading there. Move on to the next lot. And by the way, now we have information on 507, and it's 292 to 215 in terms of, let's call them leads. These are not final figures, and things can change. We've seen that in India between the leads, and as more and more votes get counted, things go around. Now look at this. These 5 states, all 5, if you look on the extreme right, were projected by pollsters to be won by the Democrats. Now it is really, really strange that Virginia, which was projected to be won by 12%, Republicans are leading there. Now that's the kind of state you feel Maya's cautionary note is important, because to be projected to, and it's traditionally Democrat, to be projected to lead by 12% and then trailing is very strange, and maybe it's just particular votes being counted. New York, always Democrat and projected to do so, and is leading there. Now, North Carolina, another very important state, narrowly projected to be won by Democrats. Trump is leading. Rhode Island, that is a shocker, because, and again, that makes me think again and again about what Maya said, that it's really too early to say. It's traditionally Democrat. The polls projected a margin of victory of 31%. That's like, you can't get safer than that. And the Democrats are trailing. But it's only 4 electoral votes, but it makes you wonder whether there's something more to come in this election, because that's a very, very unlikely. Virginia and Rhode Island in particular. Vermont, yes, traditionally Democrat, projected to be Democrat, and Democrats are leading. Now let's move on to the next set. We're going through all of them. Now all the ones that are projected to be Republican and are traditionally Republican, Kentucky, Tennessee, Louisiana, Indiana, and Mississippi, Republicans are holding all of them. So no errors when it comes to forecasting Republicans, but there are a lot of errors when it comes to forecasting Democrats. But not Illinois. Illinois is a traditionally Democrat and was projected to have a winning margin of 16%, and in fact the Democrats are leading. But Alabama, Missouri, and Arkansas, all Democrat, all Republican, they're leading. But look at Michigan. Projected to, by the Democrats would lead and win by a margin of 8%, and they're trailing there. These are just, I mean, the polls are just completely out, if the current trends are correct. But again and again, these are like leads in India, round 1, round 2, round 3. Lots of votes are being counted from different areas, and the situation can and will change over the next 24 hours and longer. Florida was the first big signal that Trump would be on a strong wicket, much stronger than the polls suggested. Texas, this was closer than in fact, polls suggested a 2% lead. At the moment, it is about that, but there was a time when the Democrats were leading, and this could go back and forth as well. Iowa, this is the one state where the polls were wrong about the Republicans. Well, not wrong, but so far, the trend seems to be different to what they suggested. Wisconsin, again, a huge 8% lead projected for the Democrats, 52 to 44, but the Republicans are leading there. Minnesota, as projected, it is a swing state, but it was a pretty strong margin projected, and Democrats are leading in Minnesota at the moment. Now, if you look at 4 out of the 5 are traditional Republican states. All 5 were projected to win by the polls, and the Republicans are leading in all of those. Kansas, West Virginia, North Dakota, and South Dakota. Colorado is holding on to the Democrats, although it was going back and forth initially. And those are indications that things keep changing as more and more rounds of votes get counted, and more different types of votes. Postal ballot votes versus in-person votes, early votes versus late voters. Now, Montana at the moment is one of the few, again, of Republican projections that seem to be trending differently, but again, that could change. The lead could be very narrow there. The Republicans were projected to win that by 5%, but in fact, the Democrats are leading, but it's only 3 seats. The other 3 that follow projected to win by Republican, traditional Republican, Wyoming, Utah, and Oklahoma. Republicans are leading in all of them. And in New Mexico, a clear lead was projected for Democrats, 12%. It's a traditional Democrat state, and they are leading there. Polls are right there. Let's have a look at the last 5 out of the 50. There's 50 plus DC. Just Arizona left. Democrats projected to win quite narrowly, 3%, and they are actually leading there. So the polls seem to be right. Again, early stage, and this is a swing state. But Amitoj, are you going to believe Dorab ever again? He's a pollster, you know.
If he can do this,
I always believe Dorab over you, and you already know that. but I just want to give you a short update, and I'll
so do I. That's the
California
problem.
and Washington. Yeah, California and Washington have been called, as I understand from CNN. They projected it towards Democrats. That was expected, and that's what we know. I just want to make a small point about Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. Yes, there are huge leads for Donald Trump out there, but very few votes have been counted. And every thought that we are learning about both those 2 states, what we know is that here's a situation where you're going to get very tight. The margin that you're seeing right now, particularly in Wisconsin, is 234,000 votes. You're not going to get that. You're going to get a much shorter margin of about 10,000 to 20,000 votes. Question is, which way does it go?
Right.
I'm sorry.
Amitoj, you're sounding like a cephalogist. Yeah, kya ho gaya?
Can I ask Amitoj a question? I'm not clear about the stage of counting. When are the actual votes counted, cast yesterday, and when are the postal votes being counted or the absentee ballot being counted? Because different states have different rules, and this time there are so many absentee votes that are we jumping ahead of the gun? I just don't know.
Yeah, so I have that actually open in front of me by coincidence. Here's the thing: the 2 states that start counting. Well, let me just break this down in a different way. Here's what happens: there are 3 different ways of counting the votes. One is you process the votes before the election, and that includes you are counting your early walk-in votes. In-person votes. The second way is when you're actually counting it just before election day. All right. So one is when you get it, the moment you get it, you process it. You don't count it, but you process it. You open the ballot. You keep it ready to be counted very quickly. The second step is before election day, you are allowed to do the same process of opening the ballot, getting it ready to be counted. And then there is on election day. That's Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, the 2 states that we are talking about. Florida, Indiana, Michigan, New Hampshire, North Carolina, Ohio, all of them can count just before election day. But Arizona, Georgia, Minnesota, Nevada, they've been counting, they've been processing for a long time. So that's how it works, which is why Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, we're not going to get a result very soon.
Now the view is that it will finally come down to the blue wall. The 3 states in the blue wall, and you're saying 2 of them will start counting quite late.
Well, what I'm saying is that you're going to get a much closer result later. And the reason for that is that in both these two states, what we have seen historically is, remember, the margin for this blue wall was 78,000 votes. And just a fun fact for all of you out there, that's also in Pennsylvania, the margin of the Hindu American voters. And that is something that you should know, that they voted for Trump last time. This time, they've not even been reached out to. So that could be an interesting margin to watch out for a little later. But in these three states, what happens is that initially, you're going to see a Republican, uptick. But that's going to change. The Democrats are going to catch up a little later. That's just how it works in these three states, particularly in this election. There is also the anomaly of the pandemic. We don't know certain things, and we have to be very open about that.
Yeah,
very true, actually. Yeah,
Point
go ahead, Raj.
Trump only needs to win one of Pennsylvania, Michigan, or Wisconsin if he holds all the states that are traditionally Republican. So really, it's coming down to Pennsylvania again, like you said earlier, because he can lose Michigan, he can lose Wisconsin, doesn't matter. He's going to win as long as he gets Pennsylvania.
But if he loses Arizona, does he have to make up for it?
He has to lose that.
Yeah, he's losing one or two of the traditional Republican states that table showed. Losing meaning, again, early stage leads. But I wanted to ask you, Amitoj, something that Maya mentioned earlier, and I don't want to raise any panic or fears, but what is the possibility of really violence on the streets? You mentioned the crowd outside the White House had Black Lives Matter posters, and many parts of New York, the shops are boarding up their windows. I think Bloomingdale's boarded their windows, worrying about post-results violence. Is it a reality, or is it a little bit of extra worry and fear by the media and others?
No, I don't think it is. I think if there is one, there are two words that I want to just throw out there before I answer that question: anxiety and PTSD. The key point out here is that we're getting a bit of an indication from Donald Trump. And here's the thing that baffles me. I don't understand why the world still has hope that Donald Trump will act presidential. He doesn't. And he's riding on that. He is not off, the deep state, and he doesn't want to act like that. And what he has done is saying a few things. I want to just point out two things. One is that he said, we're going to be sending out our lawyers on election night. The second thing he said was, in fact, this was reported by CNN, by sources. They said that he is going to speak tonight. He also said, I might call it. I might say that I won the election this night. A third thing, which, pardon my language, but this is what he was said, again by sources, that in 2000, when the recount happened in Florida, you had a situation where the Republicans were way better prepared than you had the Democrats, okay? This time, the Democrats have been prepared. There's been a litany of lawyers who've been ready, armies of lawyers sent in each counties. They'll be flying all over the country right now and tomorrow. I can vouch for that. They'll be going to the courts to make sure that they are ready to question each ballot. But one source, close aide of Donald Trump, actually said this, that this time there will be no pussyfooting when it comes to our lawyers being aggressive. We will go for it. And it's so crucial. The Amy Coney Barrett situation is so crucial that she is now a part of the Supreme Court. John Roberts, who was the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, who is the Chief Justice, he was the swing vote in the Supreme Court. Now he's not. Now it's a 6-3 conservative court, and you're going to have a situation that it's going to reach the Supreme Court in a tight case, and I don't want to say the rest. It's going to be what it's going to be, in the words of Donald Trump.
Let's get Mr. Rangaswamy in. So Rangaswamy, in the context of all this change happening, and it's obviously not a landslide for either side, you work closely with the Indian diaspora. Were the Indian diaspora more or less equally divided and not terribly engaged with this election, or will they be worried about certain results? What's the mood of the Indian diaspora?
We are very engaged. The diaspora is extremely engaged. Just to give you a backdrop and shine a spotlight on the diaspora, Indian diaspora has spent the last 8 years getting the community to be politically engaged, Republican, Democrat, Independent, etc. Right? And in 2017, we celebrated that we're not only 1% of the population, but 1% of the U.S. Congress, with 5 seats out of the 535 that are possible. This election, there are 3 more candidates we're tracking that could increase that 5 to possibly 8. And that is Sarah Gideon in Maine, Shri Kulkarni in Texas, and Hiral Tipirneni in Arizona. They all 3 look they're in close races, and something good can happen there. The other more important thing I don't want people in India to forget is that the Indian American community is so ingrained in the different cities and states and places we live in. This time in diaspora could not even count the number of Indian American candidates running for office. You won't believe this number. We estimate there are between 200 and 300 Indian Americans running for office. Mayor, city council, school board, you take that, there are hundreds of people running for office, and many of them are going to win. So the story that's lost in the big picture is Indian Americans are very engaged. The Indian American community is given tens of millions of dollars to political candidates. Indian Americans, 200 to 300 of them are running, and quite a sizable group could actually win mayor, city council, school board, state assembly, and so forth. So that is the spotlight in all this.
That's wonderful to hear, actually, because the Indian community has done very well as heads of major organizations, Google, Microsoft, MasterCard, Indira Nooyi of Pepsi, done very well on the commercial side and now moving into the political side as well. That's great to hear. We'll just take a short break. Before we go into that, just news about Texas, which was very, very close earlier. It now looks as though the margin towards the Republicans is increasing. It's about almost 4% now. When we come back, we talk about that Senate again. Is that becoming more crucial now than ever before? See you in a moment. Let's be clear, while it has been a good day for Donald Trump, the story is not over, as we've been saying all along. He's in the lead, he looks like he's doing well, but lots more votes to be counted. Let's have a quick run through of state by state once again, because that was very informative to see the current situation and to understand where we are and how things can change. Now we have information on 514, only 24 left to get information on. But remember, information means very little information. But in this you can see particularly Pennsylvania crucial and Georgia crucial. Both projected to win by the Democrats, but the Republicans are winning. Moving on to the next 5 states, all according to projections. No surprises here. Moving on to the next. These are either traditional Democrat or traditional Republican. We see the swing states. That's where all the wrong forecasts have happened. And so far, Virginia, the biggest surprise, slated to be won by the Democrats by a 12% margin. Currently, Trump is leading there. All Republican traditional as per forecast. Even the Ohio swing Republican state currently being led by the Republicans. Moving on to here, all again exactly according to forecast, but they're all traditional states, no swing states here. The polls were absolutely right because the margins are very large. Then moving on to the next 5, where we these are the really surprise states. Michigan, meant to be won by the Democrats by 8%. They're trailing there. And Wisconsin, meant to be won by the Democrats by 8%. They're trailing there. Iowa is a bit of a surprise. We'll come back to that later. California, always solidly. California, Minnesota, Oregon, all according to plan, as per the pollsters' forecast, including the swing state of Minnesota right now. So the story's not over. Things are just creeping a little bit here and there. And the worry is, as Maya and Amitoj are saying, court cases, court cases, court cases, if it's a very narrow victory. This is, again, all traditional, no swing states, and really gone according to forecast, except for Montana. Montana is a bit of a surprise, a very big surprise. Here, everything according to the forecast. Arizona, a big relief for Biden. It's fairly large, 11 electoral votes, and meant to have won by only 3%, and they're leading there. But again, early days. Okay, we'll take a quick break and we'll be back. We'll be back in just a minute, maybe 2 minutes at 10 o'clock. See you then, and we'll talk about what we've been promising. How important will the Senate be? After the break.
Welcome back. It's the most anticipated election in the world, the US presidential election. The big question, which way is it going to be? Now, the polls had indicated that it was going to be in favor of the Democrats. A poll of polls by CNN, a poll of polls by the BBC as well, it seemed to indicate that approximately 8 to 10% was the percentage of the lead that the Democrats would actually have, Biden would actually have over Donald Trump. But if you've just tuned in or have been watching for the last couple of hours, and we can tell you that results and projections, which you can see on the bottom of your screen over there, 508 is the projected seats so far, 510. Trump has taken a handy lead. These are projections, remember, these aren't results, right? And however, it seems to be going completely against what a lot of the polls indicated. In fact, if you go state by state and you compare with what the polls actually said with the reality on the ground, then it marks a stark difference. Why exactly is this taking place? I just want to go across to Seema Sirohi, who also joins us at this stage. Seema, there's a phenomenon of the shy voter in the United States, and there was a sense that this shy voter might actually go the Republican way. Firstly, what is the shy voter? Because there are certain pollsters who've said that no, they have accounted for the shy voter in whatever they polled before today actually took place. But is this a factor? And is this something favoring the Republicans?
Absolutely. Shy voter is somebody who won't admit to pollsters, even to family members, that he wants to vote for Trump. And that the pollsters haven't really accounted for. And so when they do the polls and call on the phone, many people don't admit to who they are voting for. So the two polls that got it right the last time in 2016 have explained the shy voter in this way, that you ask them differently. You ask the question, who's your family voting for? Who's your neighbor voting for? And then get to the question, who are you voting for? So there's absolutely a lot of people in America who don't want to admit, because Trump has been demonized as a xenophobic, racist leader who has divided the country so much. And the mainstream narrative here for the last 3.5, 4 years has been that. So it's very difficult to then admit to someone that you're going to vote for Trump. And the other factor has been the campaign. Trump did a tremendous, last few days where he campaigned really hard, and he had thousands of people sort of turning up for his rallies in these battleground states. He really put his heart and soul into it. And of course, he said many objectionable things. But the one thing that he said that seems to have resonated is that if you vote for Biden, there's going to be socialism in America, and that he will shut down the economy. That has kind of, gone through like an electric shock, the shutting down of the economy again, because many people are just simply unable to make ends meet, so they don't want another lockdown.
Moment, I want to go across to Bajpai. Mr. Bajpai, is he still there with us? Baj, I think just for the benefit of our viewers tuning in now, because there are all sorts of numbers which you've got on different channels, different networks. For example, BBC has got 192 in favor of Biden, Trump 114. It's important to clarify what the numbers are. What we have on our screen are results and projections, right? Whereas some of the others seem to have just results. Because if you look at just the results, it's still Biden ahead.
Yeah. Some people like the New York Times have not called Florida, they've not called Georgia, they've not called North Carolina. So you get a much lower number, and Texas. So all these numbers are minus from Trump's total. So it depends which news organization is calling which state at which point in time. Right now, you can assume that Donald Trump is short of a majority, but he's over the 200 mark. Okay? Because he's going to win Texas, he's going to win Florida, he's going to win Georgia, and he'll probably win North Carolina. So it doesn't leave a lot that he is losing from the states that he had last time, except this northern belt, which is at the moment too close to call. Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa. Ohio will probably go Democrat as well. Mm-hmm. The interesting ones is that I just got a message saying Fox has called Arizona for the Democrat. So this is the first gain for Biden in this election, if this is correct. And I think it is, because if you look at the numbers, the amount that the Republicans need to win in the last 20% of the votes left is some 66% of the votes. So it's a bit tough. Iowa is also interesting. It's running much closer, but for the last 15 minutes, Donald Trump has taken a lead. So really, we're seeing a position where Donald Trump, if he holds Pennsylvania, even if he loses the others, would still get past 270.
All right. Mr. Subramaniam, I just, again, a basic question which a lot of people here in India would want to know. How is it that all the polls, almost all of them in every single state, have got it wrong, other than a small one, particularly in the battleground states?
Yes, there are several reasons why the polls are not always right. The first was the shy voter phenomenon that the other panelists talked about. That may be much more of a factor in some of the states that are at the margin. But I think the other phenomenon is really people who just stay away from the polls for a variety of reasons. This time, of course, because of the widespread.
Go ahead. Yes, go ahead. All right, we've lost that line with Mr. Subramaniam. We'll come back to him in just a few moments. Do we have him back? All right, Mr. Subramaniam, we lost your line for a moment, but do go ahead.
Okay. I was saying that there are two reasons why the polls get it wrong. The first is the fact that some people simply don't declare their intentions. And the other is that people simply don't go to the polls for a variety of reasons. This time around, because of early voting through absentee ballots, as well as early voting in physical kind of formats in several states, that proportion has been diminished substantially. Of course, nobody can forecast which way the bias would go, whether the early voters would be more on the Trump side or the Biden side. And that was another factor where the polls might have got it wrong, because the presumption was that several of these early voters would actually go to Biden, because Biden has been urging many of his supporters to go early, and the presumption was that would swing the election in his favor. I'd like to caution all these, the forecasts are still based on incomplete data. So there are several states that are reporting less than 70 to 80% still. And some of these are crucial states. So I think I would hesitate to make a forecast at this stage. It is very, very close, but it's very hard to make a forecast at this stage. So a lot of the polls, whether it's the New York Times or the BBC or whoever, I think they're still, some of them are more cautious than others, but it's still forecasts.
All right, Seema, let me come back to you. The bottom line, is there still an expectation by the end of today, in the next several hours, we will decisively know who's winning these elections? Or is there still that possibility that this could end up in court and the final results could take a little bit more time, a few more days perhaps?
See, I think it depends on what happens in Wisconsin, Michigan, etc. Otherwise, it all will depend on Pennsylvania. And there we know that they are allowed to count votes for the next 3 days. And the Republicans probably will challenge that very, very strongly. And then it could be a little bit longer before we know it. But if other states are called tonight, then I think we'll have a result tonight. But one thing is for sure, it was not a blue wave. And those who had talked about it with such confidence, compared to those who had traveled, like some journalists who had actually traveled to battleground states, reported very differently. They talked about the fact that the stimulus package that Trump has given actually reached people, small businessmen, including many Indian Americans who were very happy that they were able to get through this very hard time. And those people don't get captured by polls, and what Trump has done, he shaved off the Democratic lead in almost every minority group, whether it's African American men, whether it's Latino men, Indian Americans as well.
Mr. Subramaniam, over here in India, we've followed very closely Kamala Harris for obvious reasons. Is there a sense that the Democrats have not been able to achieve as much as they wanted with her in terms of reaching out to Latino voters or black voters, which is why they brought in Barack Obama into the campaign?
Yes, Barack Obama has a reach that almost no other Democratic leader can match. In fact, I would say no other leader in America can match his ability to connect with the voter. So that was certainly a huge asset, and it came in quite late. I think he's been active only for the past 10 days or so on the circuit. I think Biden was somewhat handicapped by the fact that he was really not campaigning in many places. He was just doing it in a few places, and earlier on he was just doing it through electronic means. So that was definitely a disadvantage, and perhaps that disadvantage might have been a factor. Although Trump, in contrast, has been very active, especially in the last few days, going physically from state to state. That might have had an impact.
All right, Mr. Subramaniam, just hold on for a moment. We've got some visuals which are coming in now of some Black Lives Matter protests which have been taking place in Washington, I believe. These shots coming in from Washington. Black Lives Matter has been a movement that remains active in the United States. It was meant to have some sort of impact in these elections, but the big question is has that really been the case, considering the fact that Trump in the past has had fairly disparaging remarks about the Black Lives movement itself. Let me go across to Maya for that. Maya, how was Black Lives Matter meant to be or seemed to be a really important part of the campaign? At one level, given where we are at this stage of counting and of projections, it perhaps has not had much of an impact as far as the vote count is concerned.
Well, Vishnu, there are many questions sort of rolled into that, and I think what we've seen pretty much from early on in the pandemic, from I think when George Floyd's killing took place and the protests that we've seen after that, what were meant to be protests, peaceful protests in support of racial equality, soon became sort of violent on the streets. We saw it on several streets of American cities, and what happens when that kind of violence is visible to the public in the media, whatever, is that you create this perception that, look, if we're going to have people on the streets, there's going to be a law and order issue, and everyone rallies around law and order. So suddenly you saw that Black Lives Matter and racial equality, the issues for which people were gathering around and protesting, sort of became secondary to the breakdown of law and order, and that again becomes a campaign issue for the Republicans as well. National security, the safeguarding of the police force, law and order, things like that. So I think Trump used that to his advantage. The Republicans use that to their advantage. But I just want to say I keep taking on a note of caution, because I think Seema pointed out that there are going to be late counting situations in some states. There's possibly going to be a challenge. We're going to see the Democrats unwilling to concede tonight if it is too close to call. And this election is going to play out for a few more days. I don't think it's over. I do strongly feel that this is a polarized election. So if you have Black Lives Matter on the one hand, and you have white supremacists who are arming in militias and attacking people on the other hand, we saw those videos from even places like Louisville, Kentucky. I think it was a few weeks ago when they were targeting a BBC reporter or a Channel 4 reporter on the streets. It's a tense situation. I mean, somebody I spoke to in my own family, and I have a large family in the diaspora across the United States, said to me the air is rancid with hate. Now, I don't know what the answer to that is and what we can expect from that.
Amitoj, a couple of important states over here, Arizona, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. How is this incredibly crucial at this stage going forward in terms of who may eventually come out on top?
Oh, it's a massive. Let's just break it down very clearly, right? Right now, what you have a situation that Minnesota is still, you're looking at it slightly Democratic. But Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, that's the blue wall area. Ohio, one can say right now, has more or less gone Republican. There is a chance for the Democrats to catch up, but we have to focus on Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. These three states are the big states. They're called the blue wall. It was always very clear when Donald Trump had flipped them in 2016. He had taken these Hillary states, and the fatal mistake that Hillary Clinton had made back then was that she hadn't traveled to Michigan, which carries 16 crucial electoral votes. And together, all three of these actually carry 46 electoral votes. And if you look at the margin, that was the margin was 36 electoral votes. 306 Donald Trump got, and 270 was the finish line. I just want to add a point out here to what was being said earlier. You mentioned the concept of shy voter. Social desirability is a phenomena that's being talked about a lot. And what that basically means is that all of these voters who are shy voters don't want to openly come out and say that they're Donald Trump voters and supporters. They are desirous of being socially acceptable, and that is a problem. The other thing is that you're talking about Florida and Texas not being called just yet. But we have come to the understanding now that in both these states, the Republicans are leading. And because there's a Supreme Court advantage that the Republicans or Donald Trump has managed to, rush in a candidate there, get through the Senate hearings, put in the Supreme Court against all norms, is a suggestion that they are going to win when it gets to the court, the Republicans. And they also have the president's White House, it's with them. So they have a lot of power that they can use within Washington, D.C. Arizona, Minnesota are two states that you mentioned. I am more concerned right now in many ways about what's happening in the Senate race, but that's a separate question. The big one, Vishnu, is this phrase that's being used and abused in this election season. It's called peaceful transition of power. Will that happen? That's a question that we'll have to wait and see. And I completely agree with the panelists when they say that we'll have to wait for a few days. Yes, we will have to wait for a few days. Either ways, there will be a sore loser. There will be a sore loser on both sides, whoever wins. And, you know, you call America the beacon of democracy, but this is the ultimate stress test of democracy in America, because you're going to see a lot of problems. And you talked about the Black Lives Matter, march that was going on in the BLM Plaza outside Washington, D.C. But simultaneously in Oregon, in Portland, which is on the West Coast, you're also seeing a unity march that's taking place. Protesters are out there, but they're marching for unity. So you might see that happen too. So let's not just assume that there will be chaos. The chaos will ensue when Donald Trump, when the election is not called, particularly with Pennsylvania still hanging on till Friday, and he says, well, I'm prepared to call it, because he's already indicated that he's prepared to call a win. He doesn't want to wait for Pennsylvania. He has made that very clear, and he's called the Supreme Court, the state Supreme Court of Pennsylvania's decision to actually continue to go ahead and count the votes all the way till Friday, a disastrous decision. He has said that very clearly. So he might go ahead and call it. And that is when you might see some chaos happen. That's why there's a non-scalable fence out there at the White House.
Right.
You talked also about Barack Obama. Last point, Barack Obama. I think it was a horrible move to send him to Georgia in the last day, but they didn't have a choice because they had to use their star campaigner. They couldn't send him to the Blue Wall. They sent him to Georgia. Georgia is a state where Barack Obama lost, both in 2012 and in 2008. It was not a good idea to send him, and that might have galvanized the non-democratic voters. And George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, these are moments, these are iconic moments that have now been lost in the year that has been 2020, a total chaotic year. So anything is possible.
All right, Baj, let me just come back to you for a bit. Would you say that this election in the United States is going to boil down to the swing states, Arizona, Florida, Georgia, Iowa, Michigan, North Carolina, Ohio, Pennsylvania? Because if you look at traditional Democrat states based on results and leads so far, and if you look at traditional Republican states, there isn't very much of a crossover so far.
No, Arizona is probably the only crossover so far. And
it's a swing state, isn't it? Isn't Arizona a swing state essentially?
Yeah. And that's why it's a crossover. That's what I'm saying. Right. Arizona has probably gone Democrat. So that's probably the only change that is happening so far that we can see. Iowa has now gone back to a 5% lead for Trump. It's not likely to change with almost 80% of the votes counted there. Michigan is still under 50%, so you don't know where that is going. Ohio has a big Trump lead. The others are, Pennsylvania is at 50%, so we can wait on that one.
And I think if you look at Florida, 51% at this stage to Republicans, 48% to Democrats, 94% of the votes in. I beg your pardon. Yeah, 94% of the votes in. This is obviously key to this election. And how important would Florida be for both sides, given the number of electors at 29?
I think if Trump had lost Florida, he would have probably lost the election. I mean, it's a very key state for whoever wins the election. Between Florida and Ohio, I think it's only been maybe twice in the last 70 years that someone has won the presidency without these two states. So it's very unlikely that you win without these two states. And it's looking bad right now. It is possible still for Biden to win if he takes that whole northern belt of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, but it's going to be really close there. I want to raise 2 points that Maya and everybody else discussed. I think Black Lives Mattered backfired. It gave Trump one big issue, which was crime, violence against white people. It managed to, I think, solidify a lot of the white vote behind him. If you look at the polls, it's showing 56% of whites are supporting Trump. I don't think that was the number before this Black Lives thing started. Day before yesterday or 2 days ago, 3 days ago, there was a shooting in Philadelphia. There was rioting there. I don't know whether that has affected the voting in Pennsylvania or not, but I don't think it helped. the Democrats. So the second thing that nobody's commented on is the huge turnout. Has this turnout helped the Democrats or has it helped the Republicans? In Florida, it has very clearly helped the Republicans.
Yes.
In Miami-Dade, the number of Republicans that turned out was phenomenal. They have reduced a 66-33 kind of result in 2016 to one which is closer to, what, 55,
All right,
45.
Baj, just hold that thought for a moment. We need to take a short break, come back with a lot more. Do stay tuned. A huge election in the United States and a surprise at the moment. The Republicans, Donald Trump, appearing to have a considerable edge at this stage. Not over yet, however. All right, well, in case you've just tuned in, this election is going down to the wire, though at this stage it does appear unexpectedly that Trump is quite clearly ahead at this time. But there are messages from both sides doing the rounds on how on both sides are going to try and prevent the results from being announced early on, and that the fight is not quite over as yet. Well, we have a very special guest with us, Mr. G. Balachandran. Kamala Harris's uncle joins us now. Thank you, sir, very much for being with us. How are you seeing things right now? Do you think that the Democrats, that Kamala Harris will be having a very tough time in America as these results come in?
Look, the election results will not be called in for some time. There's no point in CNN or somebody calling the winner. It is the Electoral College that will decide that. The second thing is this. There are 50 states, each one has its own way of counting. So there's no unified way like in India.
Mr. Balachandran, could you tell us, Mr. Balachandran, can you tell us a little bit about your association with Kamala? When did you meet her last? How has the family always remained tight despite, she being over there, you being over here?
Let me tell you one thing. Of course, Kamala and her mother, I was very close to Shamla. Kamala is close to me. So as a family, we are very close, and she has said it, and we have said it. So in that sense, what I think of Kamala, or whether I talk to her, whether she talks to me, is nearly not of relevance right now. The relevance right now is how is the US going to be governed for the next 4 years. Let's concentrate on that and not on the trivialities, whether she likes idli or dosa or sambar. Okay?
I take your point, but there's a lot of interest in her interest in India as well. Be that as it may, let me ask you, Mr. Balachandran, in terms of what Kamala Harris potentially brings to the table as a leader, what do you believe are her biggest assets?
Look, her biggest asset is that she is young. 2, she has shown her mettle as both in the California as Attorney General and as a Senator. And she has shown herself how aware she is of the America's problem in the Senate Judiciary Committee. And 4th, she has been able to mobilize the young and energize the minority communities in a far more substantive manner than Biden alone could have done. So her impact on the minorities and the youth will be very high for a long time to come, whether she wins or loses. Okay?
She's had a major role, at least the Democrats would hope that she's had a major role in reaching out to the black community in the United States, the Latino community, and obviously the Indian community as well. Do you believe that she has been able to do that?
Oh yeah, look, with the black community and the other minority Asian Americans, there's no question about it. But we have to be clear that the Latin community, if you are talking about Florida, they are far more interested and determined by what happens in Cuba and other things than what happens in South Asia. Okay? So her influence on the Latin American community will be less than her influence on the black community and on the Indian community and other minorities.
Right.
Okay?
And sir, in terms of one of the key aspects in the run-up to the election, Black Lives Matter and the campaign over there, we've seen some of Trump's most vindictive statements directed against the Black Lives Matter movement. Do you believe that this is an area where Kamala Harris may have an edge in terms of her appeal to minorities?
Look, the next 4 years, what you have to see is whether the positive aspects of Kamala's candidature are more than outweighed by the negative aspects of Trump presidency if he gets elected. If he gets elected, his negative effects will be far more dangerous than the good that Kamala can do.
All right. Sir, I must ask you, and I know that you want this focus to remain on the US election and what's happening today, but do tell us a little bit about Kamala Harris, the person that she is. How strong has she kept up with her Indian roots?
Look, she has kept, but this question has been asked me. I hope you don't mind me saying that. What is my Indian root? Is it my language, Tamil? I speak Tamil, but I can't write very much. Is it my religion? I don't know. What is Indian root? I'm not a tree that I got a root. I was lived abroad in 18 years, so did I lose my Indian root? All that I can say is this. Whenever she was in India, she was very happy with the food, with the environment, and she was in Chennai. She was quite happy with the friends who came, dropped in, our Indian friends, my parents' Indian friend. She was all happy. So I think that's the Indian root. She never felt out of place in India while she was in India.
And how does she identify herself in the United States? Being of mixed origin, how does she see herself? What is her identity?
Look, there's no question about her. She was brought up in an Afro-American community all her life. She went to a school with majority of Afro-Americans. My sister was living in Oakland at the time, which was Afro-American. My sister was involved in civil rights movement. So all her life, she has had far more Afro-American friends, family friends, than anything else. Therefore, there's no question. If given the choice and given say yes or no, she will say she's more Afro-American than anything else.
Mr. Balachandran, one final question to you. Could you tell us a little bit about her entry into politics, the American mainstream politics? Why did she believe that this was a path for her?
Look, that is the influence of my sister Shamla. Shamla had told her children, if you want to study, become a lawyer, doctor, whatever you are, that's good. But whatever you study, whatever you learn, see how you can use it for the good of the society. That's why when she became a law, she didn't go into corporate law or private law.
Right.
Okay, so from then onwards, she has dedicated her life. She did as a district attorney of San Francisco, as an attorney general of California, as a senator from California, and now she expects to do as a vice president of the United States.
All right, Mr. Balachandran, it must be an incredibly proud moment for you. The elections are really going down to the wire, but one way or the other, Kamala's contribution huge, and it's something really worth watching out for. Thanks very much indeed. Amitoj, I wanted to come back to you. How much of an impact has Kamala Harris had on this election campaign for the Democrats?
Well, Thanks so much for that, Vishnu. I was listening very intently to what Sir was saying. It's interesting because there are a few things that he said I need to be highlighted, put the spotlight on them. The first thing he said is that, in effect, Kamala Harris doesn't identify as Indian or Indian origin in America. In America, she's thought of as black. The black community considers her one of theirs. She went to an African-American college also, Howard University. She was in Canada for a bit, but she came back. But essentially, she grew up amongst black people. Her mother, like the gentleman was saying, was also somebody who was married to a black man, even though from the Caribbean islands. And they both had a love affair and they got married. They later separated, but she was brought up in a black community. So that is very essential. I think it is very important now to also give you the flip side to this, that Donald Trump hammered the point of Kamala Harris not being kind as a prosecutor when she was a prosecutor in California to the black community. That may have resonated. The big news right now, Vishnu, is that Ohio has actually gone for Donald Trump. And Ohio is one of those states that very few presidents have not won and still gone ahead and held the White House. This is a situation where Republicans have won now the crucial battleground state of Ohio. So is it a bellwether of what's likely to come right now? No, we know the blue states are still important.
Okay.
I don't think now Kamala Harris is a factor. I think she has been removed from the equation. It is basically a factor of how many voters have come out and voted in these three states of Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan.
Okay.
We don't know yet about North Carolina because that's slightly close. That could prove to be a critical state, and also Georgia.
I wanted to go across to Durab. We just sort of came to a break, Durab, and I wanted to go across to you earlier on. The other important sort of results that people are looking at are the Senate results. Now, 51 is the majority mark over there. And according to the Associated Press right now, it's 42 for the Democratic Party, 45 for the Republicans. This has changed, as I understand it, in the last little while. And there was always this expectation among the Democrats that, look, irrespective of which way it happens, we will have a controlling stake or a controlling say in the Senate. Firstly, for the benefit of our viewers, how important is the election for the Senate? And B, where do you see this going?
I think if Mr. Trump becomes the president, it becomes extremely important for the Democrats to control the Senate so that he can't ram through his judicial nominees. And also then they mean that they have both the houses. So that gives them some flexibility, though Mr. Trump can, of course, veto any bills that don't have a two-thirds majority in either case. But they need to control the Senate only in order to ensure that Mr. Trump does not just put more judges on and on and on. Otherwise, the government is going to be deadlocked anyway because the House is going to be Democrat and the Senate is going to be Republican. But there is I think one of the seats in Arizona is flipped. I hear that there is a seat in South Dakota, which may slip. In fact, a larger number of Republican seats are up for grabs. Not that they've been grabbed. They're Democratic seats. They need to pick up 4 seats net. They're dropping one definitely in Alabama and probably one in Michigan. So they need to pick up 6 seats to get a majority in the Senate. And that changes the entire equation as far as the Democrats are concerned. If the Republicans control the Senate, even 50, because the vice president breaks the tie, then they're home. So it is now that it looks as they may not win the presidency, it looks much more important for them to get that victory in the Senate. So they at least have the 2 legislative chambers with them.
All right, Durab, thanks very much for explaining that to us. We need to take another short break, come back with a lot more. Do stay tuned. Welcome back. What a day it's been in the United States. All the polls seem to be getting it wrong, at least so far. It appears that Trump is going to come back to the White House. Will there be a surprise in all of this? Let me go back to Mr. Subramaniam. Out of approximately 12 swing states right now, Arizona, Florida, Georgia, Iowa, Michigan, Minnesota, North Carolina, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Texas, Wisconsin, and Nevada, there is only one swing state, Minnesota, where it appears on the basis of leads that the Democrats might get that.
I think Arizona is another one.
Arizona, yes, that's right. That's right. Arizona has just come in as well. That's right.
Yeah.
Arizona and Minnesota. But it's all red otherwise in these swing states. And so this is where the Democrats, more than expected, they assumed that they were going to win several of these states, and that's not happened at all. So they've held their traditional areas, but these swing states, which could have gone either way, are clearly in favor of the Republicans. Is this what's going to be the difference?
Well, I think the polls have got it wrong again. I think it's completely unexpected. I think we all thought that this time they'd learned a lesson, and the polls would actually make some corrections for both the likelihood of people not showing up for the polls, and also for the possibility that people simply don't declare their intentions. But I want to go back to something else that you talked about earlier, that's the likelihood of lawsuits. I think there is no doubt in my mind that there will be lots of lawsuits in every possible swing state where there is some possibility of questioning the result. And I think the lawsuits will take place both in the state courts as well as the federal courts. Because some of these matters are a matter of state law, and that's why you saw a distinction made between the Supreme Court's ruling in Pennsylvania versus Wisconsin, because there is a difference in the way the Supreme Court saw the interpretation of state law and the jurisdiction of the state's own Supreme Court versus the U.S. Supreme Court. So this is going to go on for, I think, days, if not weeks, beyond the deadline. I also want to talk about one other thing that maybe one of the other panelists mentioned. I think we'll see a number of delayed votes because there's going to be a lot more of absentee ballots cast, and the cutoff dates are not clear, and they vary from state to state. So whether ballots that were postmarked before today, that is today in the United States, but were received at the ballot boxes, at the counting centers, 3, 4, 5, 6 days later, are they going to be held valid, or are they going to be declared invalid? So some of these very, very narrow margin states, it might hang on how those states are whether those votes are counted or not.
Yep.
And some of those might well turn up in a court, and we may be back to deja vu, revisiting Bush versus Gore in 2000. So everything hangs on 500 and odd votes in one particular state. I think it might come down right down to the wire. And
Baj
we may be down to one
Mr.
or two
Subramanian,
states.
1 second. Baj had a point to make. Baj, go ahead. Yes.
Yeah, there's something very strange that has happened in the last 20 minutes. The New York Times is now showing Georgia tilting to Biden. Now, if this happens, this is a huge, huge change, because if you add this to Arizona, then the race is much closer than we are talking about. I think it's a very, very big change, and we should, with Georgia has got 80% of the votes counted so far. So let's see what happens. This was a state that the New York Times was giving to Donald Trump by, they said it was very, very likely about an hour ago. So, yeah.
16 electors in Georgia. A little while back, Baj, it was clearly in Republican hands with 80% votes, percentage of votes in, at 53 to 45. So it seemed to be quite clear, but now you're indicating that that's changing, right?
So
the
that
New York
means
Times says so, yes.
That means 27 electoral votes from 303 could move down. So now that changes the equation quite a bit.
Vishnu, may I be permitted to clarify something?
Yeah, please.
You know, let's take the state of Wisconsin. Early voting in Wisconsin is 43% of the total electoral votes in the state, not of those who voted. 43% of the total people in the electoral rolls voted postally. And in Wisconsin, the postal votes will be counted later. In Pennsylvania, 25% of the total electorate, which is 2.41 million, voted before voting day. Georgia, which is the one you were talking about, 53% of the total electorate, not of the total votes, If there are 100 people who are eligible to vote, 53% have voted in advance. Have they been counted? So I think you need to wait.
No, that's
particularly
absolutely key.
Wisconsin and Pennsylvania.
That's absolutely
don't
key.
allow
That,
you to count those
yeah,
votes
no,
after the day is over.
Look, I need to take a break. I'm going to come back with Amitoj to repeat this point on which state counts when, because that's going to make this.
And also, how many votes are there, Vishnu, and how many votes are there to count? That's the question. Not
Right.
which votes I could count later, nothing to count.
Right. We're going to take a short break. We'll try and get. Amitoj is smiling. He's got an answer for you, Dorab. So just wait. We'll come back with that.
No, answer. Sorry, I don't need an answer. I've got an answer.
I'm sure you do.
That these Pennsylvania and Wisconsin count after voting is over. That's the law. I don't make the law. I just tell you about the law.
All right. We're going to take a short break.
Both Pennsylvania and
Maya
Wisconsin
needs to
count
go away
later.
for the moment, but we'll come back with our other panelists in the next few minutes.
Welcome back. One of the key factors in this election that whoever eventually wins, it's unlikely it seems that it'll be a landslide, number one. But number two, there's going to be a huge amount of rethinking by pollsters. What are they doing wrong? Didn't they learn the lessons from last time? Most of them were talking about a landslide for Biden. The great Nate Silver, who you don't get a better pollster than him, gave Biden a 90%, well, an 89% chance of winning. But now it's really neck and neck. Currently, there's no doubt that Trump has an advantage. But like we always said, the voting is counted stage by stage, just like leads in India, round by round. Their voting is done in certain areas that come out earlier. And if you count early voters first and people who vote physically first, those are generally more Republican. And if you count postal ballots later, they are generally more Democrat. So what happens is that early trends may be more towards the Republicans. And that's what the Biden camp, I guess, are hoping, that things will change as more and more. But if we look at the data, it's really looking, well, we'll look at that graphic later, but if you look at, say, the swing, there are two very clear things. One is the traditional Republican states, and there are about 19 of them, 20 of them, they're all going to the Republican. And the traditional Democrat states are all going to Democrats. Slight doubt about Virginia, but that's going back and forth. The margin there is only 1%. Of course, the pollsters said 11.8% would be Biden's or the Democrat margin of victory. Currently, it's Republican 1%, then Democrat 1%, and about 2/3 of the vote, 67%, have been counted. But otherwise, all safe Republican states won by Republicans. One doubt about one little state, Nebraska, CD2. That's only one seat though. That's going back and forth. But otherwise, all Republican safe states going to being won by Republicans. All Democrat safe states, which are 19 in number and 217 electoral college votes, all going to Democrats. You don't even need polls there. But let me tell you, if you look at the polls there, the margin of victory, I've just been studying them, the margin of victory for Democrats suggested by the pollsters was always more than what they've actually got. And in the Republican state, the margin of victory of Republicans suggested by pollsters was always less, or mostly less than what they've actually got. So even in the traditional states, which have gone the way of anybody who didn't even need a poll for them, pollsters have slightly underestimated the extent of the Republican vote, and they have overestimated the extent of the Democrat vote. But now let's just look at the swing states. There are two types of swing states, right? There are swing states which are projected to go to Democrats. Let's call them Democrat swing states. And there are 139 electoral college votes there. And there are 10 of them. Of those 10, which were projected to go to Democrats, at this moment, and things can change because this is the key area, at this moment, out of those 10, 8 are going to Republican. And on one we have no information. Things can change. For example, in Wisconsin, the Republicans have a lead of just 5%, and in North Carolina, the Republicans have a lead of just 1%, so that can switch. But at the moment, the swing states that were projected to go to Democrats by narrower margins than in the traditional states, those are now going towards Republican. Going towards, they're not declared yet. That's very, very important. Then there are 2 Republican swing states where Republicans were meant to win by a narrow margin. That's Ohio and Texas. Ohio, the Republicans are winning. They were meant to win by just 2%. They're actually winning it by 8%. And Texas, pollsters forecast that Republicans would win it by 1%, but they've actually are leading by 5% with 78% counted. So again, the Republicans are holding on to their swing states and are leading in a lot of Democrat states. But, and this is the most important proviso, these are not results. Later stage ballots, all that are still being counted. And many are only 50% counted, 60% counted. So, and we've been seeing that things are changing as they go along. So we've got a long way to go before we actually know how close this is going to be. But we've got Amy Casbin with us. Thank you, Amy, for joining us. In a nutshell, what do you feel right now?
I think I feel probably like a lot of Americans and a lot of people around the world. Nervous, tense, waiting to see, where's this all really going? It's very close. It looks very tight, and so I think, and I think it's going to be a long night because, or rather, a long night in America and a long day here, because of the nature of the way the voting has been carried out this year, with so many absentee ballots cast early, which appears to take a longer time to count, and which in some cases couldn't start to be counted until yesterday itself in America. So I think it's tight, and it's and it's unclear. You can't say anything definitively.
What do you think has been the underlying factor? They call them shy Trump voters. They're saying pollsters have not really sampled the right people. Why is there's no, I mean, the pollsters are forecasting a landslide for Biden. That's not happening. It's going to be close. We don't know how close because votes are still being counting, as you just said. So what actually happened in this election?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think we have to still remember that, what the kind of complexities of the U.S. electoral process, whereby, I mean, last time, Hillary Clinton won the popular vote, but she lost in this funny institution we have called the Electoral College, which basically gives voters in sparsely populated rural states a bit more, the proportion of their vote somehow counts for more. And I think that, this is a big issue, actually, that these kind of rural states, their votes count for more. And so you have this. So, I mean, I think, Joe Biden, when I last heard, was leading in the popular vote, and I expect his lead in the popular vote will increase as more populous states like California, as their votes are tallied and come in and are added to the total, where, you know, one of the most densely populated states in the US. But the vote of a Californian actually counts for less than the vote of somebody from, say, Montana or Nebraska, because of the way the Electoral College is constituted. So I think one of the things that we'll be really looking out for is whether we have a situation where, again, you see that there's a, you know, the popular vote goes to Biden, but the Electoral College system favors Trump because it overweights the kind of sparsely populated rural states and give their votes greater importance in the final outcome. So that is actually a very real issue. And in several presidential elections, we've seen that this has now twice, in the case of George W. Bush and in the first Trump election, resulted in a candidate who has lost the majority of the popular vote, but has nevertheless won the presidency because of the Electoral College system. I think if it happens again this way, there will be a growing sense that, you know, are these elections and is this electoral system really fair and really representing the needs of the country? So there is a system skew towards the Republicans. And this is deeply rooted in the way that the Electoral College was set up by the constitutional founders who came up with this system. In fact, they came up with this system precisely because they were concerned that letting the majority vote could result in kind of populist candidates, extremists coming to the fore, and they wanted some kind of check and balance to make sure that kind of moderates came in. And so it's not a direct election, it's an indirect election. And this weightage given to different states is not based only on their population. And rural states are given overweightage in the Electoral College. So that's a very important thing. But there's no doubting that it's clear that Trump has a very strong and loyal fan base, and he has an extreme appeal to many Americans who somehow feel that the political establishment doesn't represent them. I think there's no disputing that, you know, in terms of excitement, energy, you know, Donald Trump is a more electrifying candidate than Joe Biden, who has been compared by some people to, I don't know how many of your Indian viewers will be familiar with Mr. Rogers, who was the host of a children's television program. He was a reverend. He was all about niceness and kindness and trying to see the good in things.
I have to interrupt you. Mr. Biden is going to speak. We'll have to interrupt you. Sorry, Biden is going to speak.
Good about where we are. We really do. I'm here to tell you tonight, we believe we're on track to win this election. We knew because of the unprecedented early vote and the mail-in vote that it was going to take a while. We're going to have to be patient until the hard work of tallying the votes is finished. And it ain't over till every vote is counted, every ballot is counted. But we're feeling good. We're feeling good about where we are. We believe one of the nets has suggested we've already won Arizona, but we're confident about Arizona. That's a turnaround. We also just called it for Minnesota, and we're still in the game in Georgia, although that's not one we expected. And we're feeling real good about Wisconsin and Michigan. And by the way, it's going to take time to count the votes. We're going to win Pennsylvania. I've been talking to folks in Philly, Allegheny County, Scranton, and they're really encouraged by the turnout and what they see. Look, you know, we could know the results as early as tomorrow morning, but it may take a little longer. As I've said all along, it's not my place or Donald Trump's place to declare who's won this election. That's the decision of the American people. But I'm optimistic about this outcome. And I want to thank every one of you who came out and voted in this election. And by the way, Chris Coons and the Democrats, congratulations here in Delaware. Pardon me? Hey, John, the Gov, yeah, the whole team, man. You've done a great job. I'm grateful to the poll workers, to our volunteers, our canvassers, everyone who participated in this democratic process. And I'm grateful to all of my supporters here in Delaware and all across the nation. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And folks, you heard me say it before. Every time I'd walk out of my grandpa's house up in Scranton, he'd yell, "Joey, keep the faith." And my grandma, when she was alive, yelled, "No, Joey, spread it. Keep the faith, guys. We're going to win this." Thank you, thank you, thank you. Your patience is great. Let's walk over here.
Yeah, there we are. Mr. Biden highlighting the point that we've been trying to make all evening, that this counting is going to be very different from earlier elections. The early counting will be mainly of Republican supporters because they come in person and vote more than Democrats do. Democrats mail-in votes. They send their votes in advance. They're a little more worried about and more concerned about the pandemic, while the Republicans would turn up on the day, that's yesterday, and actually vote physically themselves, and those get counted first. So what Mr. Biden... So it seems what Mr. Biden was saying, that don't be worried about the current trends which are worrying for him. When the later votes are counted, there will be a compensating huge swing to him and he will catch up. So Amy Kasman, he seemed pretty confident when he spoke just now, Mr. Biden. That what was the purpose of that speech, do you feel?
Obviously, the purpose of that speech is to basically kind of urge his supporters to stay calm and emphasize the point that the election is not over until all votes are counted, and that it's going to be a slow process. There has been a lot of concern, maybe founded, maybe unfounded, about Donald Trump's willingness to really accept the electoral verdict. And there had been a lot of concern that Donald Trump would try to claim victory even when when there was huge numbers of outstanding votes to be counted. The Democrats had urged their supporters to go out and vote early through absentee ballots or through early voting to protect themselves from the pandemic and to avoid huge queues and crowding on Election Day. Donald Trump had urged his supporters to vote on Election Day itself. So there's a sense that a lot of the uncounted votes that came in through absentee ballots and came in through the post may well be Democratic ballots. There had been concern that Donald Trump would come out and claim victory, on the basis of early leads from the Election Day voting, that, and then basically try to go to court to block the counting of other votes. I mean, there's been a lot of, this is what makes this election so extraordinary, because Donald Trump had kind of made comments like, "Oh, we'll see if I, people would ask him, do you commit to the peaceful transfer of power if you lose?" And instead of saying, "Of course, this is our system, we're a democracy," he's alluded to the potential for large-scale fraud. He said, "Well, we'll see what I think of the results." So he's really crossed a lot of lines that Americans have not seen crossed in their country in a very long time, or ever. So that had raised a lot of concerns and fueled real anxiety and fear that he and the Republican Party might somehow come out to kind of claim victory when really the full picture wasn't known, but on the basis of early leads. So I think Biden's, coming out, and neither has he. Normally, candidates only come out to either concede defeat or claim victory. They sit in their rooms and watch the results. I think the purpose of this was very much to say it's going to take a long time before the results are known. We have to be patient. This is the process, and to really emphasize that this process is still on. The result is not known. It is not certain which way it's going. It's obviously close and it's tight, and to kind of preempt Donald Trump coming out to claim victory, basically, because normally what you see in the ethics, or what we've seen often, is that the losing candidate comes out to concede defeat, and then the winning candidate comes out to claim victory. I mean, in the kind of, this isn't the law, there's not a rule, but in the kind of the way it's been done and in the protocol and the choreography of American democracy, someone claims defeat and someone then comes out and claims victory. And I think, here's Biden basically saying the process is on, the votes are being counted, it's going to take a long time before we know the results. And this is obviously an attempt to kind of preempt, any kind of claim by Donald Trump of victory on the basis of less than full counting. So I think that was the purpose, and to kind of reassure his supporters and also make it clear that there's not going to be a result tonight. And, he's a man in his late 70s. He may well be going to bed or trying to get some sleep. I think in some of the states, vote counting has been suspended for the night. The vote counters have gone home. I think in Georgia, I think they have announced that, okay, we're calling it a night and we're going to come back tomorrow morning. So I think that is his purpose of making this speech tonight at this point.
All right. Well, joining us now, Nish Acharya. He supports the Democrats. We're also joined by Anand Ahuja, who's been supporting President Trump for a while right now. Nish, let me come to you first. Donald Trump in the last little while has said we are up big, but they're trying to steal the election. We'll never let them do it. Votes cannot be cast after the polls are closed. And yet we've seen Biden do the same thing. So my question to you is, both sides are essentially claiming victory. Biden is being more democratic about it, saying that, we are doing well, we've got clear signs. How do you account for this huge divergence at this stage?
Well, I think Trump is continuing what he's always done in terms of campaigning, and that's trying to muddy the waters. The reality so far is that the only one state has flipped, and that was Arizona, which came to the Democrat side and to Biden. Trump has not won any new states. And right now we know there's 1 million votes left in Pennsylvania, maybe a little bit less than that. A lot of votes in Michigan and Wisconsin, and even Georgia has enough to tip the scale. So right now, Joe Biden did the right thing, which was to say, we're not going to know the answer, but we're in a good place. And I would tend to agree. I think a lot of Democrats at the beginning of the night thought that, this dream of winning Texas and Florida and North Carolina and Georgia would come through, and got a little disappointed when that didn't happen. But those were always Republican states where we overperformed. And so now we're in a position where exactly what we thought needed to happen is going to happen, which is win Arizona and then win the northern states, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. And let's hope we can do that over the next day or so.
Donald Trump's latest tweet, we are up big, but they are trying to steal the election. We'll never let them do it. Votes cannot be cast after the polls are closed. And then I'll be making a big statement tonight, a big win. In fact, Biden alluded to this as well, that, look, it could be that don't expect everything to be announced right now, because counting is going to actually take some time. Let me take that across to Anand Ahuja. Mr. Ahuja, at this juncture, it appears a lot closer than what it was over the last 1 hour or so. If you look at results, and if you look at, I beg your pardon, if you look at votes and if you look at projections, then the sense was that Trump was way up ahead, and that was unexpected. But at this stage, it appears that the Democrats are closing the gap, and with a lot of the votes left to be counted, the early votes in states from those who had mail-in ballots and the like, would you agree that this is going to go right down to the wire, and tonight we may not actually have anything?
Vishnu, I agree with your statement that it's going to go down to the wire, but I don't agree with your earlier statement. In fact, if you see that it's a Trump who has actually narrowed the gap as far as media is concerned. If you see for the last 2 months, media has actually written off Trump, and in almost all the polls, especially if you see by national polls, Biden was leading Trump by double digits. So tonight, basically, if you see, Trump has actually outperformed what was expected of Trump. In some of these states, especially in Florida, if you see, Trump is leading. Pennsylvania right now, Trump is leading. So there are a lot of states where it was actually not expected that Trump will be carrying on those states. As far as Arizona is concerned, Arizona, in fact, particularly after Cindy McCain's endorsing Joe Biden, it was very clear that Arizona will be difficult for Trump to win.
Yeah, in fact, that gap has increased in Arizona. It's 53% to the Democrats, 45% to the Republicans at this stage. Nishacharya, let's look at a couple of the other states that Mr. Ahuja just mentioned over there. Let's, for example, look at North Carolina, a key swing state over here. It's big in the number of electors, 15, and the gap between the Democrats and the Republicans just 1%. Again, an example of a state going right down to the wire. And in a couple of the other states as well, it's fairly close. Iowa, for example, 46 to 53 in favor of the Republicans. And Texas, again, it's close, 46 to 52%. Wisconsin, 46 to 51% in favor of the Republicans. So a lot of the swing states, in fact, most of them have gone to Republicans. Do you believe that's not gone? I mean, it's sort of headed towards the Republican side. Do you believe that that would reverse?
So I think I'd make 2 points. First, on your earlier question, in the U.S., we had 2 recent elections that were not announced on the night of. That was in 2000 and 2004. The victory was much later. With John Kerry, it was 2 days after. With Al Gore, it was obviously 18 days after. So there's no rule about it, the winner being announced the night of. The second thing is, in terms of your point, these were not swing states historically. Texas, Georgia, North Carolina were solid Republican states that they would win by large majorities. And so we fell short this time on the Democratic side winning them, but it's stunning that Texas was within 2 points. North Carolina is still up in the air, even though the Republicans are slightly up, and Georgia is going to tighten up when the votes from Atlanta come in. So I think what we can say is America is changing, and it's leaning more Democratic when these 3 swing states that were never in concern. Joe Biden didn't visit Texas once, and he almost won it. And now we'll see what happens in the upper Midwest. But to date, Trump has not added a single state. In fact, he's lost in these 3 states, and he lost Arizona. So we'll see what turns up the election because of the U.S. system. But, I don't think the swing states have swung Republican by any analysis of the data.
Well, with 91% votes in places like Florida, Iowa, 78% in Minnesota, 90% in Texas, one could argue that in fact a lot of votes are in.
Not,
so
the
possibility of change could be lower.
Historically.
Just 1 second, I want to go across to Mr. Bajpai. Baj, go ahead, yes.
Yeah, I want to make one point that Dorab made, which is about the counting in states like Pennsylvania, where 2 things are happening. One, the counties that the Republicans are winning, most of them have counted more than 80% of their votes. Okay? That's 34 out of 40 of them have counted 80% of their votes. 16 have counted between 65 and 80% of their votes. The ones that the Democrats are winning, including Philadelphia, which is the biggest county or place there, range from 43 in Philadelphia to 64 in Montgomery, which means there is a huge amount of votes there for the Democrats to be able to pick up. And in places like Philadelphia, the Democrats are sweeping. The third point is on mail vote. So far, out of 2.5 million votes that were cast by mail, only 728,000 have been counted. That's 30%.
Right.
The Democrats have won almost 80% of those votes. So if there is what Biden just said, that I think we can win Philadelphia, is not way out. I mean, there is a huge possibility. There will certainly be a closing of the gap. Whether that will be enough or not, I can't tell you. But what I'm saying is, don't count Philadelphia out like we counted Georgia out, and now Georgia is back in the state.
So if Philadelphia does, hypothetically speaking, Baj, go to the Democrats, how does that change the equation?
Oh, it changes it enormously. Last time he got 303 odd seats, I mean electoral votes.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
And here he lose 20 for Pennsylvania. He has lost 11 for Arizona. That's 31 off. So now you take that off and he's at 272 or 271, whichever it is. And then the 2 seats which are single seats in Nebraska and in, I think it's in Maine, come into play. They don't give a winner take all. The winner takes 2. Then the third seat goes to the other party, depending on the vote share, something. So these come into play, and it could be either a dead heat or it could be Biden just getting 270. I mean, I can't tell you.
Okay, so I need to take a break, Baj. I need to take a break. We'll come back and we'll discuss these key contests in these battleground states where it's really, really tight, too close to call. Time for a short break. Welcome back. In case you were watching earlier, then decided to watch something else and have rightly come back, then you would notice that it's changed again. Because the race is to 270, that's the magic mark of 538 in the United States. Biden wasn't doing well. These are projections and votes cast, but that's changed now. Biden is ahead of Trump. It appears that Biden is ahead. Now, how exactly has that happened? Let's go across to Amitoj once again. So, Amitoj, you've got a couple of key observations about Florida, number one. But number two, I wanted to ask you this. Now, apparently 36.4% of all ballots are left to be counted. 77% approximately have been counted already. This 36%, what are they? Are they all mail-in ballots, early voters? And if so, could you just explain to our viewers about when these will all get counted?
Okay, I'm going to try to put this to rest once and for all, but I will say this to answer that Florida question very quickly. Florida has been called by CNN for Donald Trump, so Florida is out. Why that happened, we can get into that a little later. But to answer your question now, here's the way voting has been counted. There are the key states that we'll talk about, and I want to talk about Georgia to start with, because Georgia so far is the only anomaly, and what we know is that Georgia has counted slowly. We don't know why. Why has Georgia counted slowly? We don't know, but Georgia was one of the few states, like Arizona, that could have started processing the ballots, the early ballots, mail-in ballots that they got, the absentee ballots as they're also known, and in-person voting, but early in-person voting, all right? They process that. Why they have not processed that fast enough is the big question. Now, to just give you a number, Fulton County, that was mentioned earlier by one of the panelists, is where Atlanta is. Atlanta is the biggest area for Georgia. That is one county that has already decided to call off counting. They said, we're done for today. We're going to start again at 8 in the morning. And 48,000 votes, I believe, are still to be counted in that county. 48,000 mail-in ballot votes, just to make that clear. Now, let's go to another state, Michigan. All right. Michigan is different from Georgia in the sense that you can only start processing your early mail-in ballots and your in-person voting ballots one day before. So what you will see in these states is that you will get the early counts will be of results will be of the mail-in ballots and of people who have voted before election day. But the key states, so Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, the confusion is about those two states, right? Pennsylvania and Wisconsin have not counted mail-in ballots till 7:30 p.m. today. All right. And at 7:30 p.m., they were actually counting the in-person voting only today. They refused to count. And it depends from county to county in these areas also. So just be clear, Pennsylvania is not even counting what is likely to be a huge chunk of Democratic voters.
Baj, go ahead, yeah.
I want to take his point on Michigan. I just did the same numbers that I did on Pennsylvania. Here, only 25 or 26% of the postal ballots, which are 2.8 million, have been counted. And Biden leads by 220,000 votes here. He is trailing in the main vote, I mean the consolidated vote, by 280,000 votes. So that's point number one. And again, the areas that are counting are the ones that are more Republican, have had much greater count than the ones that are Democrat. This is also true just now when I was glancing at Wisconsin. Milwaukee, for instance, which is the biggest voting town or city in the place, has only had 36% of its votes counted. And that is 2 lakh votes in that county. So that's more than the next 7 counties. So here Biden is leading by 20% on just 36% of the vote. So I don't think any of these 3 states at the moment can be written off. Unfortunately, Wisconsin doesn't separate their mail votes from their in-person votes. So you can't tell how much of mail ballots are waiting. But what I'm saying is, in all these states, there are huge Democratic areas like Philadelphia, Detroit, Michigan, and Milwaukee, which still haven't crossed 50% of their count, have huge Biden lead. And secondly, they have huge leads in mail-in votes, which are running at about 30% count.
Yes.
Dorab, you want to come in on this, just on those, and I just want to repeat this for our viewers. What Amitoj was talking about, Georgia with 16 seats, important, but the processing has been slow. Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, the process of counting the mail-in ballots and early ballots has just about, as I understand it, just about started. And thirdly, Michigan with 16, what Baj was mentioning, that again, it's slow over here. We don't have an idea. Would you like to add to
also
this?
The main towns which are Democratic are running very slow on their count. They're at between 30 and 50%.
Yes, in Michigan, right? Or across Baj?
So in Michigan, in Wisconsin, and in Philadelphia, which is the main town
Democrat,
Pennsylvania.
Okay, Dorab, go ahead, yes.
Yeah, Vishnu, the point is that of the total votes, registered voters, 53% in Georgia have voted early ballot. In Pennsylvania, 25% has voted in early ballot. In North Carolina, 59%. Large proportions of people have voted early ballot.
Yes.
Now, Pennsylvania and Wisconsin certainly will not even think of processing the ballots until today. The rest have the right, if they wanted to process them earlier. But Georgia, 53% of the total electoral college, of the total number of voters, voted early.
Yes.
Now, I think what we need to do is have a bit of patience. I think that we will need to have, whether we like it or not. I don't think we're going to get... Florida, I think, is good because it counts early. It's already started in Florida, probably is a reasonable thing. But the others haven't counted the way Florida has. So I think we've just got to...
Yeah, no, it's not going to be over just yet. Prannoy, you wanted to come in? Go ahead.
No, I just wanted to explain exactly what Dorab's been saying, and that this is just a totally different election. Because of the pandemic, and because there's generally been a trend in America for the last 20 years to allow voting before time. In fact, it started about 20 years ago when it was 10%, then it went to 15%, and I think this time it's way up. Added and pushed also by the pandemic. People didn't want to come on the last day and think there's a big rush. So a lot of voting happened before. And that, how it's been counted in each state, has made everybody wonder what's happening with the election results as they are coming out. The leads, as more and more votes are being counted. And as Dorab says, if the postal ballots and many of the early voters are being counted last. Early voters meaning the people who voted a week, 10 days, 2 weeks ago. Those and postal ballots are mostly Democrats. And if they are being counted last, it was expected that the early surge would be for Republicans. And look at how things have changed with the bookies. We had given the figures earlier, and just look at the change over the last 24 hours. If you have a look at what the bookies' odds were, what is the percentage chance of winning, the bookies gave Biden and so bookies gave yesterday Biden 60% chance. And if you look at Trump, it was 60% for Trump, Biden, and 40% for Trump. And today it's now 45-55. But in between, about 3 hours ago, there was, the bookies were saying 60% Trump and 40% Biden. So if I just make it clear, here it is, 3 hours ago. Yesterday, Biden was the favorite, 60% chance of becoming president. 3 hours ago, Trump, huge favorite, 65% chance of becoming president. Now, as the postal ballots start being counted and the margins are narrowing, the bookies are even saying it's coming closer to 50-50. I mean, they really, as Dorab says, they put their money where their mouth is. And it's interesting how they keep changing and change fast.
If I could just step in, I don't know if you can hear me.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah,
yes,
okay,
yes,
so here's the thing. I think you're a boxer, you were a school boxing captain, I remember. Here's what's happened. First round has happened. Now second round is going to happen, and second round is about to happen in a few minutes. Donald Trump is coming out to speak. And what has he tweeted? And Twitter has blocked that tweet. They've added a caution to that tweet because they believe that it is misleading about an election or other civic process. Yes, it's happened right now. That tweet is, we are up big, but they are trying to steal the election. We will never let them do it. Votes cannot be cast after the polls are closed. Now, Joe Biden knew he was going to do that, which is why 5 minutes before, Joe Biden came out and said,
spoke earlier.
It's not my place,
right.
or Donald Trump's to declare the election. This is what I've been saying for a long time, that this is not an election about votes. This is an election about the courts. And Donald Trump has already claimed with another tweet, I'm going to be speaking tonight, a big win. He has declared victory. And he said he would do that. He said that he would not wait for the Pennsylvania result. And he has already done that. Now, I want to answer that question that you asked me earlier about whether there would be violence. Now we can talk about that. Because here is a point that
exactly.
we need to
I was going to ask you that.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that is what...
Now with the uncertainty, with lawyers, with, Trump's initial surge because of the procedure of counting, which has an inherent bias, that is really causing a lot of tension, I'm sure.
I don't think...
Yeah, that's a very good point, that this could lead to violence and lawyers.
Prannoy, just 1 second. Nish Acharya wanted to come in. Go ahead, Nish.
Yeah, so I was going to say the U.S. has a long history of absentee voting, which was the idea that if you could not go to the polling place, you could mail it in earlier. And there's a whole set of procedures that were set up for that. Yes. And most of those rules are what was applied for mail-in voting, which, as your other guest said, is a relatively new concept. So the tension we have right now is there are some people who believe that mail-in voting is not legal. And so, there's no evidence that it's not, but there's a constitutional theory that it's not. And that's what some of the Trump folks have tagged on to. So far, the American courts have not shown a willingness to take that up. But there is some tension about this idea of a phony vote. There's no legal jurisprudence also around it, but there is some of that thinking.
If I may just add to that, it's also ridiculous of Trump to say the result must be announced on the same day as the voting. There's nothing in any law that says that. I mean, you announce it when it's clear who's the winner and all the votes have been counted. You don't have to do it that day regardless of the situation. It's crazy for him to say it has to be announced on that day.
But
in fact, the Secretary of State has to certify the votes. Otherwise, there's no, that's when the Electoral College starts working. I think the date for that is months away.
Yeah.
But Dorab sir, just let's go back to history now. Let's go back to the recount in 2000. The Secretary of State, who, by the way, was the Secretary of State in which Mr. Bush's brother was the governor. We have to go back there and understand what happened there. The voting did not happen because there was a Brooks Brothers riot, because they had Roger Stone and company. They literally forced themselves into the election center of Florida in Tallahassee, and they intimidated the people who were election employees. They were trying to count the votes, and they decided we're not going to count the votes because we're in a dangerous situation. And then it went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, okay, done, no more counting, end of story. So that is what Donald Trump is again trying to do.
But Amitoj, in 2016, Donald Trump's victory in Pennsylvania came 3 days after the election date. His own victory came in Pennsylvania 3 days after the election date. Simple.
He didn't need Pennsylvania.
So sauce for the goose hopefully sometimes has to be sauce for the gander. Not always, I understand in politics, but sometimes has to be sauce for the gander.
By the way, as Amitoj pointed out earlier, the Chief Justice and the lady who just got appointed to the Supreme Court fought the case in the Supreme Court for Bush. And
No.
What they did was they overrode the state constitution to take that decision. So even though they didn't do it just now in Philadelphia, on which Trump has been shouting about a lot just now, about counting votes to be counted till the 7th or whatever it is, there is a big possibility that they will intervene at this level.
Sorry.
The only consolation is that the main election lawyer for the Republicans is now against them, Ben Ginsberg. He's written an op-ed in the 2 or 3 op-eds in the Washington Post
he's
saying
not on the Supreme
the
Court.
Republicans are doing is wrong.
But 1 second, sorry, can we just take a step back? John Roberts is the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. He was part of the Bush election lawyers team. You talked about Amy Coney Barrett, who was also part of that team. You forgot the third judge, Brett Kavanaugh. There are 3 judges on the Supreme Court out of 9 who were part of that team. I mean, what are we like? That's such a indicator of what's going to happen.
But Ben Kavanaugh was Ben Ginsberg was the chief election lawyer advising them. These are the lawyers. Ben Ginsberg for the last 20 years has been the chief lawyer advising the Republicans.
Yeah, I was talking about Brett Kavanaugh. Brett Kavanaugh was also part of the team.
No, we are talking.
Yeah, those are lawyers.
The point we're making is 3 of the judges on the Supreme Court.
I'm really, of course, for Trump, it's absolutely ideal if there's any confusion and it goes to Supreme Court, because he's packed it now with Republican judges. It's a Republican-dominated Supreme Court. Any case that goes there, you don't have to know the law, you just have to know who the judge is. Okay, we'll take a short break and we'll come back. We'll look a little bit ahead at how, from being favorite to win 24 hours ago with the bookies, Biden is now only a 40% chance. That's in a moment from now.